What is up, wrestling fans, and welcome to the November edition of 2001 A Wrestling Odyssey. I'm your host, as always, Callum Wiggins, remembering that this time I am the host of this show, and joining me, as always, is Robert DeFelice.
I'm so proud of you, Callum. How you doing on this wonderful journey back in time?
This is going to be a busy one. I know it's going to get quite whimsical and discuss all of this because it's the penultimate edition. We've only have one more after this, but kind of just need to get head down, laser focused, because this is a busy month. Probably the busiest month, at least since Invasion, if not all the way back to WrestleMania.
Yeah, lots of changes here and lots of settling into what the business would be going forward.
Yeah, so start off a little high and then ends up a little flat by the end of it, but that's just typically the way it goes in these podcasts so far. So just want to invite everyone, if you're listening and you've been enjoying the series so far, to just leave any comments or thoughts in the comment section below, leave a like, share it around with your friends, family, and anything on social media. That'd be great, greatly supported.
And of course, remember to subscribe to the channel and check out all of our other content.
Absolutely. So where do we begin? Well, we're going to begin this a little bit differently. We usually start off with the reheated tags or the news that was taking place at this point in time. We're going to start off with a show review instead. We're going with Rebellion 2001. The reason why we're talking, it's going to not be a most in-depth show review because Rebellion is one of the UK only pay-per-views, so it wasn't super relevant in the grand scheme of things. But it gives us a sense of where we are at the start of the month because Rebellion took place November 2nd, 2001, November 3rd, sorry, 2001, from the Manchester Arena in Manchester, England. 15,612 in attendance, no pay-per-view buy rates to report because it was the UK only pay-per-view. So,
Yes. Did you ever watch these as a kid?
no, I never watched any. I think they stopped doing them after 2003, I think was the last one they did.
Yeah, I think 2003 Insurrection
Yeah, and
was the last.
at that point in time, I was too young and not paying for my own pay-per-views and stuff like that, so I wasn't gonna. I did, and also it was like I can't remember what times or where these things were even shown. I don't know whether like, I assume they were probably shown on Sky Box Office or something to that effect.
Yeah, they were exclusive to Sky.
Yeah, but no, I didn't watch any. I've got like DVDs in most of them, so I did watch them afterwards, after the fact. But so this one is the only time since WrestleMania, well, the first time since WrestleMania, that we're going to have a main event featuring a one-on-one match between Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock.
In fact, this is the last time they headline a pay-per-view.
Yeah, their last time being in the main event, last time going one-on-one together. So, who'd have thought it would happen on this show?
Yeah.
Of all places. Obviously, they would have one more one-on-one match in their career, which would be the WrestleMania 19 final match of Stone Cold's career. So, but yeah, this was the big hook going into the show. It was The Rock challenging Stone Cold for the WWF Championship because Rock at the time was not the WCW champion because Chris Jericho was the WCW champion, and he would be defending the belt on this show against Kurt Angle. In terms of what.
That's loaded. Like, if you just say those two matches today, I think you've sold the pay-per-view.
Any overriding thoughts about this show before we go a little bit more in depth?
I think the main event is really underrated because it's the only time in the history of their rivalry that it's Rock as the clear-cut babyface and Austin doing whatever he can to get heel heat.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought that match it's definitely, I don't want to say it was a one-match show.
It's definitely the longest match on this show.
Yeah, I was going to say that because the other pay-per-view that we're going to be reviewing is definitely a one-match show, but it was still, it's nice to see two people that were just so unbelievably over with the audience that they could they worked hard, they definitely did work hard, but they didn't have to do anything super spectacular, and yet it was the most impassioned thing that the crowd got into all night.
Well, yeah, it speaks to the star power of them.
So, first we'll talk about the dark match, which was Billy and Chuck. This was their first ever tag team match together.
No.
They'd only recently formed after Chuck Palumbo had been kicked out of the Alliance and joined Team WWF, formed a tag team with Billy Gunn, and they defeated Lance Storm and Just Incredible.
That's insane to me that they teamed here and nobody ever saw them team on television for WWF.
They might have teamed like on TV after this in the build up to Survivor Series, but they didn't have at this point in time they're just Billy Gunn and Chuck Palumbo teaming together. They don't have the gimmick that's associated with
Oh
them.
no, I meant Just Incredible and Lance Storm
Oh, right.
because they're the Impact players, and I don't understand how they didn't do something with that.
No, well, at the time they were concentrating on the Storm and Hurricane tag team, but now they've decided to move over to the actual like tag team that was around in ECW for a good number of years. So we move on to the first match of the night, which is Edge and Christian for the Intercontinental Championship inside a steel cage. Now, one of the interesting things going into this match is that Christian is the European champion, having defeated, I believe it was Bradshaw for the title.
Yep,
So,
and he's about to go off the rails, in my opinion, because he's going to go from feuding for the mid card belt to throwing temper tantrums and not really finding himself for the next year and a half.
I think that this match was probably the best out of the series that I've seen between these two. But we've seen.
It's my favorite of the bunch.
I thought, even though the action within the ring wasn't exactly spectacular, they did do a lot of kind of innovative spots, especially for a steel cage at the time. What did you think about the fact that this was a classic steel cage in terms of the big gaps between the bars?
I'm guessing that's easier for construction, but man, it's so good. I loved the blue or black bar steel cage. I understand that they hurt like hell, and they probably you can see why because the mesh probably has more give, but this had such a better look to it, I think.
And it played a big role in the finish of the match as well,
Yes.
because after a lot of back and forth action, including plenty of Christian catapulting Edge into the cage and taking a lot of bumps in and around it, because I think there was one point where Edge was just throwing Christian from one side to the other repeatedly. They're standing on the top of it, and Christian like essentially pulls Edge off at one point and crotches him on the top rope because Edge always did that spot. That's like one of Edge's signature spots is getting crotched on the top rope.
I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, it will be broke after a while if you kept
Yeah,
doing it. But
that's true.
what happened was that Christian had managed to get all the way over one side of the cage, but Edge grabbed his leg through the bigger spaces between the bars and taped his ankles together. Very much a John Cena taping Batista's legs against the ring post kind of scenario. So
Never like that.
nah, but that means that Edge could climb over himself and even hit Christian on the way down when he
that
climbed out the ring.
that is one of my favorite spots of the whole match because it's a nice touch. Realistically, this was the Bret Hart Owen Hart finish with Edge applying a little more logic instead of it being the Christian, accidentally stepped inside of the bar and has trapped himself. He took it upon himself to hog tie Christian, and then he hit him on the way down, which I thought, why not get your licks in while you can. And this is the end of their rivalry.
Yeah, they move on towards this as we talk about Survivor Series. They'll be
They,
on
I
separate
might,
paths now.
I might add, they literally never fight again on pay per view or any type of like major platform. This is just it.
No, the next time they have a legitimate pay per view match against each other, or not even against each other, but
It's the Money in the
it's
Bank.
Money in the Bank match. And even in that match, they mostly work together to try and eliminate the other people.
Yep.
But after that, we move on to. I'm going to lump all these backstage segments into one because they're all a bit gross and like very much of the time. If you know what we're talking about, if you've been
Oh
joining
yeah.
us on this journey, Hugh Morris and Chavo Guerrero are backstage saying that they're former Alliance members at this point because they have also been kicked out of the Alliance, and that they've been assigned to do backstage interviews. I don't know if they were actually assigned or they were just two creeps for a camera and a couple of microphones. But they went into the women's locker room. They find Trish with her top off. So yeah, they get a lot of shots of Trish's bare back because seemingly
As
that's
we've learned in
fetish.
2019, that's very over.
Yeah, and later on they do the same thing where they find Lita getting her pants on. So yeah, and later on they find Mighty Molly without her cape on. But that's like it was just classic 2001 objectify women time.
Yep.
So we'll move swiftly past that and into the next match, which is Scotty 2 Hotty versus the Hurricane. I thought this was decent.
Yeah, not offensive.
Yeah,
It's the Hurricane, and he's always been good. Scott Taylor's always been underrated. So, very good.
yeah. I can't say there was anything too spectacular, but it was just two light heavyweight cruiserweight wrestlers putting on a decent match. And the one thing that I didn't enjoy about it is the fact that I never liked it when the Worm won matches.
Yeah, yeah.
The Worm is a great move. Well, it's not a great move, but it's one of those moves like the People's Elbow that really gets the crowd into it. So I'm perfectly fine with him using it because it's the most over move that he had. But just it's a chop to the chest, and so just to see someone get pinned by it, it's a little bit weak. But other than that, it was a good solid showing by both guys.
I do want to note that 6 months beyond this point, Hulk Hogan will lose to an elbow drop. But look, it is what it is.
So we move on to DDP's now got his Mr. Positive gimmick, as we spoke about in a previous edition. But this is the first time you kind of see it in action. So he comes out, he talks about how people in England are depressed, and that means the only way to go is up. So it's not a bad thing that you're depressed; it's a good thing because that's the only way. The only way to go is up.
You know what? That is very bizarre 2019 woke culture happening in 2001. That's funny.
This gimmick, I mean, he's only been doing it for probably about a month at this point in time. This gimmick is over, like big time. The crowd is already following along with his catchphrases. They're already kind of, even though he's a heel, they are still cheering him because the gimmick is just a lot of fun.
I always had fun with it as a kid. It struck me as ridiculous because I remember him also being a badass. But I always thought, that's funny. Oh, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And the big cheesy grin.
There's a funny line that Heyman said on commentary that DDP helped him get over his sarcasm.
That's funny.
And him and JR have a bit of a go at each other as they were prone to do. And then we move on to the match, which is DDP against the Big Show. And if you know anything about DDP's WWF run up to this point, you probably know which way this match goes.
How long did it last is the question.
I believe it was around about 3 minutes.
3 minutes! Two men who were both WCW World Champions, who I believe wrestled at a Starrcade once, wrestled for 3 minutes. This is peak, out of shape Big Show. I mean, in terms of, he ended up having to go to OVW and get trained and stuff. This isn't 2006 out of shape Big Show, which is another story, but this is bizarre.
If we're being technical, this is Big Show after he'd been to OVW to get conditioning training.
And you can see what I just said about him there. So, I mean, what a weird... Because both of these guys are Hall of Fame. Yep. DP's already there. It's just strange to me.
It just wasn't a good time certainly for DDP and Big Show in particular. Well, Big Show was not really being pushed in any sort of real direction at this point in time. Did you know that I was going to save this for the news section, but I thought it might just be weaved into it. DDP did an interview in November 2001. I can't remember with which group it was, but it's just like a radio interview. And they asked him pretty much how much money did he end up losing by signing with WWF early rather than sitting on his WCW contract until it expired. And he estimated that it was around about $500,000.
That's cash. That's passion, dude.
Yeah, and he got absolutely no reward for it. I mean, he got a contract and got paid for it, but he was in WWF until mid 2002, and then his career was over. So whether it was worth it, yeah, whether it was worth it or not, only he can know. But I'm pretty sure he's in a pretty good place right now, so I'm sure he doesn't harbour that much resentment. There's a segment in a darkly lit room where Stone Cold, Deborah, Kurt Angle, and Shane McMahon discuss strategy, and Angle and Austin are back to their comedy double team act, where Angle's a bit of a goofball and Austin is trying to get him to take things seriously and doesn't like the guy, but gets on with him because he's helping him out.
Yeah.
They're a good team.
And they were the comedy side of the Jericho and Rock duo that had very much gone from being like a comedy act to now they just genuinely despise the sight of one another.
So then we move on to the Dudley Boys versus the APA versus the Hardy Boys for the WCW Tag Team Championships. So this isn't, I mean, it's hard to really say. It's not bad, but after the APA get eliminated, it's just every single Dudley Boys versus Hardy Boys match that was happening. It just goes to show at this point in time, everyone does hark back to these times, like the golden age of WWE, WWF's tag team division. But it really is just three teams fighting each other over and over and over again.
So I was actually thinking about this. If you take certain people's careers and you whittle it down, a lot of people just have like the same 3 or 4 matches over and over again. Like, look at these teams here. This is the same thing over and over, but it's good, so nobody complains. Austin's career from like 98 onward, I think he only really has programs with about 4 people. You know, it's very repetitive, but when you're that hot, nothing misses.
Yeah, that is true. But just going back to the idea of how, like we've spoken on podcasts about the AEW stuff, about how it's always seems to be the Young Bucks versus Pentagon and Phoenix, and like they've had, I don't know, 3 matches with each other on AEW, and we're already saying they can't keep going back to this well. Whereas it seemed like every other week there was some combination of the Dudleys against Edge and Christian, or Edge and Christian versus the Hardys, or the Hardys versus the Dudleys, or all 3 of them like facing each other at one time. But this was a hotter time for the product, and frankly, if being fair, this was when the product was cooling off quite significantly at a rapid rate. So maybe that has part of the way to do with it.
Oh, that is true. You know, you can only, as good as the match is, like, for example, just to relate it to today, I wouldn't want to see Adam Cole versus Johnny Gargano again and again and again, as much as I enjoy those matches, and I think that's the same thing here.
So the APA are eliminated when Farouk gets hit with the Twist of Fate. So basically, that's a WWF team eliminating the other WWF team. But
It doesn't matter at this point.
Yeah, they all just want to be champions. So that's point enough. And then they do basically another short but more extended match between the Dudley Boys and the Hardy Boys. Goes about how you'd expect. Jeff tries to hit the Swanton Bomb, Devon rolls away, then it's a 3D by the Dudleys on that, and yeah, then it's over. Dudley Boys retain the WCW titles.
They're going to have, spoiler, what I think is one of the better tag team cage matches on this upcoming Survivor Series pay-per-view we're going to talk about.
I think we might come into some kind of disagreement with those ones, but we'll wait until that moment just so we can build the tension up. But we have another backstage segment between The Rock and Chris Jericho and Vince McMahon, and they showed a clip of them losing the WWF tag team titles to Booker T and Test, who had just randomly started teaming together. And I think their team name was something like TNT.
That's terrible.
But yeah, it was the idea that Vince wanted them to get on the same page before both their title matches, and then they shake hands, but then badmouth each other, and they start fighting on the sofa.
You know, just final thing about that name. We know today it would be called Booker Test, so I guess we're just glad it's not that.
Yeah, just sowing the seeds of how much there was like strained relationship between Chris Jericho and The Rock at this time. Then we move on to William Regal versus Tajiri. So this is the first of 2 matches we're going to be talking about William Regal versus Tajiri.
Which is never a bad thing.
But Regal was a lot less popular here than he was on the previous Insurrection show that we talked about, because he was pretty over at that point in time. But now he's Alliance, and the crowd is just booing the crap out of him. He just cuts a promo just insulting the British people, just in case he was getting cheered, just to make sure that they will cheer for Tajiri instead. And then this is just I was hoping for more, but it's just a bit. It was a good match, but just short. And
yeah. So, like, a lot of matches here don't go above 5 minutes.
No, I think they were just saving up for the 2 bigger matches of the night. But at least post match, William Regal gets hit with the green mist, so they get that after Regal won the match with the Regal stretch.
Yeah, the good old STF.
Angle gets interviewed by Michael Cole, says that the audience looked like they escaped Strange Away prison, which I'm like reasonably aware of, but I can't tell you any specifics, unfortunately. And
I have no clue.
And he says that he talks about how Y2J is a Mickey Mouse nickname, and then he sings the Mickey Mouse song. It's like MICKEYMOUSE. It's Mickey Mouse. Just, I don't know whether that's the thing. Only you would know that.
No, well, that is a thing. That was a thing, I should say, in like the 60s, and then brought it back in the 80s. But maybe Angle's a fan of the original Mickey Mouse Club.
I mean, it does fit into Kurt Angle's kind of character that he would do something that was popular in the 60s. But yeah, we move on to the actual match, which is Kurt Angle, who is United States champion at this point in time, fighting for the WCW championship held by Chris Jericho. This is a good match.
Not great.
You'd expect more between these 2. There was someone in the crowd with a sign. I'm super not interested if I'm looking for people with signs in the crowd. Saying like, "I won this from Kurt," and he's got a fake gold medal on it.
That's cute.
Jericho used the Three Amigos in this match, which I don't ever recall seeing him see use after this.
Well, he was getting playful. He was trying. It was clear that Hunter was out. He's finally ascending, and he's trying everything, because he tried the breakdown at the end of October, which did not stick around.
Luckily.
And now he's doing the Three Amigos, which honestly is a good fit for him. I think the only reason it ended up working better for Eddie is specifically just because of that name. You're like, it's the Three Amigos, and everybody, now it's solely attributed to Eddie, but it's not a bad move for Chris.
So after a match which doesn't really live long in the memory, there's nothing super exciting. Angle blocks the line, so he gets his knees up, and then he goes to the Angle Slam, but Jericho floats over into a roll-up, and he retains the title. And post-match, when Jericho's celebrating, Angle attacks him from behind and hits him with 2 Angle Slams to leave him laying.
Do you think that the reason it's almost mandated that superstars who have submission finishers get a pinfall finish when they become main eventers is because Vince feels like tapping out is too definitive to do on a nightly basis?
I would think so. I think it's something due to the fact that having a submission loss, it's fine when you're facing somebody in the mid card or something like that, but if you're facing another main eventer, by having them tap out, it makes it seem like they can't fight for being the main event for a little while, because they have to build themselves back up. Whereas I feel like if a pinfall, you only have to be down for 3 seconds. Like, anyone could be caught by a flash pin, really. So I'm sure that has some part of his logic. We move on to a interview between The Rock and Michael Cole, where, again, back in 2001, The Rock just makes a load of jokes about how Michael Cole is gay and prefers strudel with pie. So that's 2001 for you. We then move on to the Divas tag team match. Lita and Tori now fully in Team WWF side, faces Molly Holly and Stacy Keibler, with Trish Stratus as the guest referee. Because why not have a WWF person as the
Because
impartial
titties.
referee?
Yeah. Let's just be real, because titties.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So yeah, she was wearing a fairly revealing referee's top. Basically, the commentators were only referring to how hot all the competitors are because JR keeps making his point that Tori and Stacey aren't trained competitors. There's loads of like "We want puppies" chants. It's pretty standard for 2001.
JR has this thing, and it works out very well. He does it today in AEW, where he will enforce the idea that, like, hey, folks, these people aren't experienced in main event scene, or like in this case, hey, folks, Tori and Stacy don't really know how to wrestle.
Yeah, it's I think it was just a way to try and like cover their backside a little bit.
Well, it's 2001. I don't think anybody wants to cover their backs.
Yeah, that's true. Towards the end, Tori catapults Molly Holly into Stacy Keibler, and then Lita hits the Twist of Fate to win the match. And then Stacy pushes Trish over, well, not pushes her over, but just pushes her after the match, and so Trish slaps her and then hits a really ugly-looking bulldog. She hadn't quite perfected the Stratisfaction at this point, but by the time Survivor Series goes along, as we'll see, she seemed to have that move pretty nailed.
And, she deserves a lot of credit. If we look at where she will be a year from this and where she was at WrestleMania 2001, she deserves a lot of credit.
So then we get to the main event, like the big match that everyone was looking forward to, which is Steve Austin defending the WWF Championship against The Rock. This match is just crazy, fighting outside the ring constantly. It's pretty typical these two. When you watch these two's main event, you know that at least half the match is going to be spent outside the ring, just fighting around, just punching each other around ringside, hitting each other into ring posts, smashing each other through the announce table, that sort of thing.
And they were the best at it.
Yep, absolutely. Austin hits a low blow on The Rock. Actually, Rock hits a low blow at some point because this was a point in time where baby faces would just do the heel stuff, only they were cheered for it.
Yeah.
They get into like a lot of punchy matches with each other. There's at one point Austin does basically a rock bottom version of his pointed people's elbow, where he bounces around a little bit and does a few little like running up to Rock when he's laying down on the ground, just flipping him off and then going back and flipping him off again and then finally hitting it. And then Rock does the exact same thing after hitting his own Lou Thesz press, and then he does Austin's elbow drop.
When it comes to showmanship, like, you really can't ask for more than these two guys.
No, they were playing off each other well, and they were playing to the crowd. At one point, Austin puts Rock in the Walls of Jericho, which I guess was fairly poignant. And another time, Rock puts Austin in the sharpshooter, and Austin taps out, but Hebner has been knocked down because, of course, we have to have a ref bump for the typical 2001 main event convoluted finish. Angle interferes, hits Rock with a steel chair to knock him off the sharpshooter, but then Jericho attacks Angle, grabs the steel chair, so when Rock turns around, he thinks that Jericho is the one that hit him with the chair, because he didn't see Angle. So Rock then beats up Jericho, knocks him out. Austin goes to the stunner, but Rock counters into a rock bottom. The ref's still down after the cover, so Angle gets in. Rock fights him off again, then sets Austin up for the people's elbow. Angle trips him, stunner. Very, 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 very convoluted. I tried to make that as straightforward as it could be, but there were just so many moving parts at the end, that ending.
Yeah, and really, I hate fuck finishes. I just don't like them, and it ruined what was otherwise a great match.
So that was Rebellion, just pretty much your typical, nothing significant really happens, but it's still a fun show type of deal. I can't say it was particularly offensive or bad show in any stretch of the imagination.
Good, I think it'll be remembered for one match, if it even is remembered for that match. I think the best match on the show outside of that was the Edge and Christian Cage match.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. So now we move on to, so that was November 3rd. We've now got a couple of weeks of TV that they put together in the build-up to Survivor Series, which had already been established as Team WWF versus Team Alliance. And Foley, as a commissioner, had also deemed that a lot of the titles would be unified.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, essentially his logic was that titles don't mean anything if there was multiple versions of the same belt.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah. So let's do our usual thing where we talk about title matches. So I can't remember how many there were in October. There was quite a few. I think it was about 19 title matches in October. How many title matches do you think there were in November? More or less than that?
Gonna go slightly less.
It's a lot more. 26
No.
title matches on TV. 16 took place prior to Survivor Series. The Survivor Series is November 18th, so there were 16 title matches between the 1st of November and...
So at least about halfway through the month, they had 16 title matches.
Yep, and 10 after that. There was only 5 title changes, though, and they all happened prior to Survivor Series. So basically every title match post that was... I think it was basically a case of them trying to just shuffle the deck around and make sure that the people were holding the titles that they wanted to have holding the titles going into Survivor Series.
That's awful, I gotta tell you.
Yeah, so there was multiple title changes. So we've always spoke about how Booker T and Test at one point won the WWF Tag Team Championships. They lost that to the Hardy Boys in the build-up to Survivor Series. We had Edge won the United States title from Kurt Angle after he'd lost the Intercontinental title to Test. There's just a lot of belts changing hands at this point in time.
But at least they had the foresight to say, well, this can't last. Can you imagine?
Well, the other big thing that took place in TV in the build-up to Survivor Series is the pretty, I guess you'd call it famous now, the shoot promo that Paul Heyman delivers to Vince McMahon on the SmackDown prior to Survivor Series. In many people's eyes, this is considered like the original pipe bomb. There had been other shoot promos in the past, but this was one which really kind of stands out. Do you recall anything from this in particular?
You took Shawn Michaels' smile and you built Titan Towers.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't just Shawn Michaels. He said that like he exploited Hulk Hogan, Bret Hart, and Shawn Michaels. He mentions them all by name and says that basically just took all of their effort, took Hulkamania, took Bret Hart's passion, took Shawn Michaels' smile, and just used it to buy his own empire.
By the way, I know we're very used to this nowadays, but this is the beginning of the WWE really embracing that they are definitively what wrestling will be seen as. So you're going to start hearing a lot of like, yeah, and Hogan and Savage. And, as that continues in the promo work, which I know we're going to talk about one later, that has that same effect. And I think it's really good. And I think as we've developed over time, it's become a big part of what WWE is.
So the thing about this promo is that listening back to it in 2019, it's bizarre in many ways because Heyman is saying a lot of stuff about Vince's criticism in terms of his lack of creativity, the fact that he doesn't have it anymore. And that's what seemingly people have been saying that for a good 19 years at this point.
Imagine that.
Like he is still in charge. He's still in complete control, pretty much, of creative in WWE.
I don't think Vince McMahon is blind to the criticisms and to the fact that he's getting older. I just think he doesn't have it within himself to relinquish control.
No, I completely agree with that. I think he wants to be in control of it for as long as he possibly can do. I don't know whether it is I mean, I'm sure he is like understanding the criticism, but I think he doesn't buy it as real criticism. Like, I think he sees it as the minority against him, as opposed to what's gradually becoming not so much the majority, but is becoming a lot more. It's becoming bigger and bigger as years go by.
Yeah.
Heyman talks about how Vince McMahon's father promised him promised other promoters that they would never compete with them, and then as soon as Vince Senior died, Vince McMahon just started buying up talent, buying up territories, and essentially forming a monopoly. And then
You know,
mm,
you know what the one thing I hate about this promo is?
mm,
It leads to Taz.
yeah,
And what fart in church? You have that great build up, and this is Paul Heyman at his finest. This is Paul Heyman showing his ass that he's like, I know all these things, and I know that look, we're telling the history of wrestling because for so long WWE was just like, no, what is now is the only thing that matters, and it just leads to, hey, look, it's Taz.
I think one of the most interesting things, and partly it might be due to the fact that the SmackDown was a tape show at that point in time, so they could obviously sweeten the crowd how they would choose to. But it didn't seem like many people were getting behind Heyman in this promo, despite basically everything he's saying was true.
Okay, and it could be them sweetening the audio. It also could be fans even then not being as smart in the arenas,
Yeah, that's
and people were still completely buying babyface and heel. I think.
yeah, I think that's probably the case. But so Heyman talks about how the Attitude Era was a bastardization of the ECW, again, pretty true, and that's how it stole Heyman's money and legacy. And then he mentions how Taz was a great wrestler. He's very like very forthright in the fact that he says wrestler and wrestling in this promo a lot, whereas Vince obviously is a fan of sports entertainment. And now he says that Taz is fat, useless, a commentator. And so it ends off with Heyman just shouting at Vince and Taz coming from behind and choking Heyman out in the Taz mission.
And then doing what? What did Taz do after? That is
Well,
my problem with this.
he went on to be a fat, useless sports entertainer and commentator.
You don't what? You mean Paul Heyman told me the truth?
Yeah, I mean, spoiler. It's not a that was a spoiler basically from Heyman about how the future would end up going. But we take a break now from talking about WWF and the TV to move on to other news and events that are taking place in the world of wrestling. And there are two big things and a couple of little things. So we'll start with the two big ones, which is number one, the XWF, or the Excitement Wrestling Federation. So
I. What do you think about the letter X in wrestling? That's a weird question, but what do you think about the letter X in wrestling?
I just think I don't know if it was just wrestling. I think just at this point in time, people just saw X and thought, "Oh, well,
Oh,
we'll be
that's fucking
cool."
cool.
Yeah, instead of using like excitement in terms of spelling it with an E, we'll spell it with an X, and that's really rad, like that type
Yeah,
of thing.
very
I,
weird.
I can't think of any other like specifics, but I'm pretty sure, like, if you know, leave in the comments below. But I'm sure there are plenty other examples of people using that sort of phrasing. I mean, obviously we had the XWF here, we have the X Division in TNA coming up.
I still hate that. I think it's so dumb, but yeah, it's very much in the culture. This was the time where Tony Hawk was a big deal. So was the X Games and BMX motocross. People were just very infatuated with the letter X, and that's always something that I find interesting in this time of our
So,
lives.
so we alluded to this in the previous edition about how essentially there had been a lot of news being reported across the time that Hulk Hogan had been in negotiations with Universal Studios about potentially launching a new wrestling promotion based out of Universal Studios. And this isn't really it. I mean, it did have Hulk Hogan's involvement, at least from the beginning, but it wasn't Hulk Hogan's promotion. Instead, it was funded primarily at the start by Kevin Harrington, who's a essentially was like a business tycoon, and I think he's a former entrepreneur on the TV series Shark Tank.
Ah, yes, I know a lot about Shark Tank. I don't know much about Harrington.
No, I mean, we won't talk too much about him. He was just essentially the money behind it because the promotion itself was actually run by a mix primarily of Jimmy Hart and Brian Knobbs of the Nasty Boys.
That's so bad. It's
While
awful.
while a lot of the creative, at least from the beginning, was being handled by Hogan and Kevin Sullivan.
That's
So,
not as bad.
I guess it depends how you look at it.
It's true.
I mean, if it's Hulk Hogan without Hulk Hogan on the roster, then I'm sure it's fine. But if it's Hulk Hogan with Hulk Hogan on the roster, then I'm pretty sure I know which way most of the creative is going. Essentially, this was going to be a PG alternative to WWF because their TV-14 Attitude Era stuff, and they wanted to create something that was more akin to WCW Saturday Night.
Yeah, let me tell you, I can't get over the idea that a Hulk Hogan led promotion at Universal Studios would end up happening before this decade would finish.
Mm.
I think, the foreshadowing there is amazing.
So there was a big build up towards it. They got some celebrity involvement by getting like Kiss, and because they
Dennis
had the Kiss
Rodman.
demon still. Yeah, Dennis Rodman, Willie Nelson, Alice Cooper. They were all promoting They'd just get involved in moments where they were promoting the show, but it fell apart pretty quickly because a mixture of Hogan's father dealing with a bad illness and his own skepticism about the credibility or the potential of this promotion to get legs and like find a willing network to support them meant that he pretty much backed out of it pretty quickly. Hogan only has had one match under the XWF banner, and it would never have been like a TV show. It was a dark match with Kurt Hennig, which he put on one of his early anthology DVDs that WWF released as soon as he returned to the company.
Kurt Hennig also wrestled Dennis Rodman for this promotion.
Sure, it was the XWF.
Almost certain.
I'm pretty sure that was an Australian promotion. I think that was iGeneration Wrestling.
What are these weird
There's a
Australian
load of these
promotions?
ones. There's a load of these like just promotions just come out of nowhere. But yeah, I don't believe Dennis Rodman wrestled on this show. On these shows. The reason
That's
why we know
he's a historian, guys.
Yeah. The reason why we know anything about these shows is because they released a DVD box set in 2005. So that was when Jimmy Hart had bought basically the entire rights to the entire XWF and decided to release this DVD with him and Knobbs presenting it. This DVD set is, I mean, it's something really. I don't know what it is. It may be worse than that in certain instances because, like, at least WrestleLicious was like you could laugh at it. Like, this is pretty like nothing really. I mean, the issue with it is because Jimmy Hart and Brian Knowles spend the entire DVD set as presenters telling you how great the XWF was and how great their ideas were and how much potential it had and how they were doing things the right way and how there was going to be no more prima donnas and they wanted
How much do I have to pay for this for the full DVD set? Because I think that would be a great watch along piece at some point.
Well, you can find it on YouTube. That's how I found it. So you don't need to pay for it if you don't want to.
Good, but with Knobbs and Hart putting themselves over.
Oh God, yeah, they were. I mean, they were putting the promotion over, but they were doing it to put themselves over. Because obviously they were the people in charge of the company. So if they're talking about how great the XWF was, they're talking about how great they were.
That's so funny.
So the main storyline between these television tapings, because they only show 3 episodes worth on the DVD, but they had actually taped over the course of a few days enough for 10 shows, which they would then shop around television networks in order to try and get a deal. So the main storyline was a power struggle between the commissioner of the promotion, which was Rowdy Roddy Piper, and the CEO of the company, which was originally thought that it was going to be Hulk Hogan, but it actually turned out, after Hogan backed out, the CEO role shifted over to Sable, or
No,
Rena
no.
Mira.
You said it was shit. Go ahead. Let your true feelings be known, Cal.
Well, it was bad, so it doesn't really matter too much. But the talent they had signed with the company is basically just a who's who of people that weren't signed with WWF, apart from like a few notable names. There's no Jeff Jarrett, which is surprising. There's no
That's because
Scott.
he was too busy trying to make wrestling happen in Australia.
Yeah, there's no Scott Steiner. There's no like a few people that were wrestling for World Wrestling All Stars, but a few people that were are on this show as well. So the talent sign include the Nasty Boys, obviously. Gene Oakland as an announcer and interviewer. Bobby Heenan as a manager for the first time, although he didn't go by manager, quote unquote. He went by the term agent of Kurt Hennig.
Hell yeah. That's that's a little gem that I think is awesome.
We had Tony Schiavone on commentary
Nice.
in his essentially his last commentary role until coming back with MLW, and he got very, very unflattering reviews from people that saw the tapings. There was Jerry Lawler, who obviously we'll end up talking about when he returns to the WWF at the end of November, but for this short period of time, he was signed with the XWF until they managed to wrangle him out of his contract. Have Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Vampiro, the Road Warriors, Greg Valentine, Buff Bagwell, Juventud Guerrera, Kid Cash, Christopher Daniels, Barry Horowitz, Jimmy
Why?
Snuka, AJ Styles, Norman Smiley, Horace Hogan, Demon Dale Torborg, Marty Jannetty, Mr. Jones, otherwise known as Virgil,
Hell yes, the legend of Soul Train Jones continues.
and Mark Mero, among many other people that were signed.
Mark Mara's still married at this point, right?
I believe him and Sable were still married at this point.
Good.
But I can't say for complete certainty. The fact they were working for the same promotion probably alludes to the fact they were, and I don't believe she would have met Lesnar by this point.
Right.
So essentially, I guess the vibe they got out of the tapings was that it was a lot of reasonably talented independent guys who were being squashed in favour of giant bodybuilders.
No. You mean
So,
a Hulk Hogan promotion focused on bodybuilders? Can you imagine that?
well, there were a few prime examples of it. There was Hale, who was Jimmy Hart's protege, who was just this giant meathead who used the leg drop as a finisher.
No.
So clearly what they were trying to do there. There was also Vapor, who was managed by Sonny Ono, who was like this, I guess for like a Japanese wrestler at that time, was probably like pretty sizable. Who wrestled Sim Snooker on this show, so Jimmy Snooker's son.
Is Bischoff involved in this in any way?
No.
Wow, so they're able to get. I don't know. I hear Sonny Ono and Hulk Hogan, and I think Eric can't be too far away.
I imagine if it had survived a little longer, then he probably would have been involved in some form of fashion going forward. But
Crazy.
there's also I'm trying to remember Dresden, who was just another big like German person who basically all these guys had matches with Marty Jannetty and squashed him, which is kind of what.
No.
Yeah. And
Poor
then
Jannetty.
and then the biggest example of all was Ian Harrison, who was a British wrestler out of Leeds, who was a bodybuilder and had only been wrestling for a very, very short amount of time. And he looked like he'd only been wrestling for a very, very short amount of time. He had an unbelievably huge physique, but very little wrestling skills. And he actually wrestled in the main event of these tapings. Like, the final match on the card is him and Kurt Hennig taking on Vampiro and Buff Bagwell in a tag team match.
Huh.
Really screams main event to anyone. There was the talk about how Buff Bagwell was being pushed as one of the top baby faces, but he was getting booed constantly throughout the tapings. So they did a lot of crowd sweetening for his matches on DVD. And yeah, he just didn't look in great shape either.
That's so terrible.
We had a lot of X Division or future X Division guys in a battle royal to determine the first XWF Cruiserweight champion, which was the only championship crowned on this entire series of tapings, or at
There
least
you
on
go.
the
They're not focusing on big guys. They
yeah.
got
No,
cruiserweights.
so it was won by Kid Cash. But we had people like Daniels was in the match and Styles was in the match. They also had Low Key, but Low Key did not go by the name Low Key in the XWF. He went by the name Quick Kick.
Awful.
Mm. And obviously the big storyline hook was the power struggle between Rinomero and Piper. Piper was essentially the issue was, especially throughout the entire time, is that you have no idea from start to finish which one of them is the babyface and which one of them is the heel. Because Piper, you assume, would be the babyface in this situation, but they kind of get along for a little while, and then there's times where they fight a little bit, but then they're getting back together and chummy with each other. There's parts where Piper is like a clear babyface and is saying that he wants to do stuff for the wrestlers and backs the wrestlers to get themselves over and helps Vampiro win matches when Vampiro's babyface against Hennig to try and even the odds when Heenan interferes. But then he goes off on a huge heel promo against Jimmy Snuka when he sees him, when Snuka's clearly a babyface in this promotion. So he was just basically Piper was there just to please himself and get paid for it, obviously.
Well, when you told me Piper was there and that Mara's role was supposed to be Hogan's role, I assumed Piper was meant to be the babyface, to be a heel.
I would imagine so. So they kind of just played around with. One of them was maybe a babyface, one of them was maybe a heel, maybe they were working together, maybe they were enemies, that type of thing. It was just like a really weird scenario that Rena Miro's the CEO and she chose a commissioner that she couldn't get along with. And that's from the get-go. There was no build, but then again, they only had 10 episodes to film, and we only saw 3 of them. So there might have been other good things coming at the back of it. But none of those tapings are released available in the public space. So
No, go ahead.
No, during the battle royal, they also cut to the camera to Josh Matthews, who was in the audience.
Huh.
Josh from Tough Enough, as he's referred to constantly, rather than Josh Matthews, because Tough Enough was a big deal. And Josh Matthews is actually one of the most over guys on the entire set of tapings because of how pop.
And he was genuinely in love with wrestling.
Yeah,
I think it still shows today, even when he's got to film a show on his cell phone. He's doing it because he loves wrestling.
He had one match on these set of tapings where he got a shock win over Horace Hogan. There was Jerry Lawler wrestled once or at least on the episodes where they're available on YouTube. He had essentially a handicap match against tag team Maximum Force, which was Simon Diamond and Johnny Swinger.
Nice.
And he won pretty candidly in a couple of minutes against both of them. So
why?
Because nostalgia.
I shouldn't say why. He's still wrestling today.
And one of the other big feuds that they were trying to promote was essentially a three-way tag team, a three-way tag team feud between the Nasty Boys, the Road Warriors, and the Shane Twins.
No, the fucking Gemini.
Yep.
What?
Yeah. So the Road Warriors and Gemini were kind of in a friendly rivalry where they were both baby faces and they both respected each other, and Nasty Boys were the evil heels trying to cheat to win against both of those guys. They also had Public Enemy as a tag team there as well, but they were not as prominently featured.
Well, yeah, because you got a PG environment, and Public Enemy can only go so far.
So, essentially, that's pretty much it, really, for the XWF. I mean, you can go, as I mentioned, watch the episodes on YouTube. They're all available on the first 3 episodes are all available on there. You can listen to how all the stuff that Hart and Knobs proclaim about how great the promotion was. But at the end of the day, there's nothing. In terms of production value, the promotion isn't that bad. It had pyro, it had nice staging. The audience it wasn't like a huge audience because it was Universal Studios. It was a studio audience as opposed to a stadium audience, but it was still, they were still seemed to be into most of the stuff that was going on. But
I'm gonna throw out a theory here because I'm seeing bits and pieces. If this wasn't called the XWF with that abhorrent, we're trying to be edgy but not really logo design and feel, I think maybe it would have had a shot if it would have just been like, I don't know, Superstar Wrestling Alliance or something.
well,
You
I,
know?
I kind of believed the XWF would have found television if everyone didn't just leave before that.
That
Essentially,
too.
I think it predicated on Hulk Hogan joining and like actually signing for the promotion. And when Hulk Hogan rejoined WWF in 2002, and then a lot of other people just left either to work for TNA or to work for another one of these other promotions or to re-sign with WWF at some point, it pretty much just killed the entire thing. I mean, by the end of these tapings, Lawler was already gone and back with WWF, so they'd
It's
already
weird
lost
to
their.
think that there's some Earth 2 out there that where the XWF ends up on Spike TV with like Shivani and Lawler on the call. Like that's a weird thought.
Yeah, so they tried sending out like the tapings to potential investors, but by the time that all the like quote unquote name talent had already gone elsewhere or were unavailable to be involved in this promotion going forward, it lost all steam and it's still kind of technically around. It's never actually been. It was technically made defunct in 2011, but Hart still owns the rights to the name, and he still owns the rights to like he could still launch the promotion if he wanted to, or he had the ability to.
All right, I'm gonna hit the lottery, and that's the first place I'm going. We're relaunching the XWF.
Well, we'll have to buy it from Hart first.
Well, no, we're gonna get Jimmy in on this. He's gonna be right there with his trusty megaphone and his
Uh,
hair that just never goes away.
I'm pretty sure that would end up with another WrestleLicious if we were in charge of the wrestling company.
Well, I don't know about you. I wouldn't book a WrestleLicious.
No, but I imagine I like to think that even though we have a lot of comments to say about how good or bad WWE other promotions are doing things, when it comes to actually running it, we would be we wouldn't be anywhere better than what they're doing.
But this seems as good a time as any for a plug. And if you want to see how we would have run the WWF WCW ECW invasion that we're talking about in this episode and all prior episodes, hit up the YouTube channel. We did a Patreon exclusive. I believe it was guest 5, correct? Who
Yeah, that
wanted
was
the he wanted to see how we would look the invasion, so we did, and we all put together our fantasy cards. Tony got in on that one, and you should go check that out on the YouTube channel, as well as obviously everything else we're doing and all the other podcasts we're putting out.
yeah, and of course if you want to choose your own uh like podcast that we talk about, like literally you can name any of the topics you want. We have a pick your poison tier on the Patreon, which is I believe it's $20.
I believe
And
it's there. I think it's the $50 tier.
oh, okay, it's $50 tier. But essentially, you give us that amount of money, you can basically decide what we talk about. We will film that like between us guys as soon as we possibly can and get it out there. We're also thinking about potentially doing sometime in the future some completely Patreon exclusive content, but that might be just be coming down the line. So it's worth just keeping an eye on that space. But
Yeah, I mean,
even if you could,
if you want to see it, maybe we do a fan announce table over the XWF.
yeah, you have to pay probably
These are
more than 50.
options, but you have to pay us for it.
Yeah, you might have to pay a little bit more than 50 for that one, but it's even if you can only spare $1 or any amount of money, it's all greatly appreciated. It all goes to helping Tony in particular just keep things running here.
Yes, and we appreciate all the support.
Okay, so let's move on to the second big news topic, which was the release of an infamous wrestling book, Diana Hart's Under the Mat Inside Wrestling's Greatest Family. Now, if you thought the XWF was bad, this takes bad to a whole nother level.
What do you think about Martha Hart before we go any further?
I believe Martha Hart is completely within her rights to refuse to allow Owen Hart to enter the Hall of Fame or to allow WWF to use anything to do with his likeness.
Fair.
Because I am of the full belief, and rightly or wrongly, maybe I go too far on this thing, I firmly believe that WWF killed, not intentionally, but they killed Owen Hart.
Yes, it was an accident, but they definitely, that could have been stopped.
Yes.
But it wasn't. I am of the full belief in that as well. I also think that she was probably somebody that never liked the industry, so takes every chance she can to make sure that that is well known, that she feels it's scummy. But basically, you're getting this in book form.
Well, this is Diana Hart. This is not Martha Hart.
This wasn't when Martha Hart's book came out?
No, this is Diana Hart's book. Diana Hart, obviously, the
Oh, so that's the widow, not at this point, but that is the Davey Boy Smith's widow and Brett and Owen's sister. So I thought you said Martha, which is why I went over on that.
Well, we'll talk about Martha with this one, but it's this is because she mentions, let's put it this way, she mentions basically every member of the Hart family and anybody who's ever really even discussed or had a conversation with the Hart family within this book.
So everybody,
yeah, pretty much. So Diana Hart is obviously one of the youngest siblings of the Hart family, one of the only daughters. Obviously married Davey Boy Smith. By this point, I don't think they were divorced, but they were certainly separated by the time this book came out. She has a lot of things to say about Davey Boy Smith, not in a positive light, let's put it that way. And I kind of don't want to reveal a lot of what's actually said in this book, because a lot of it could probably be considered libelous. I can mention, like, what kind of things that she's suggesting that the Hart family or members of the Hart family were doing without specifically saying which member it is and get away with it.
You should.
Well, here's some of the stuff that she ends up saying. So she talks about how certain members of the family were depressive alcoholics. Talks about how certain members of the family were kind of whipped to their partners. So, or just like would basically just cower down to whatever their partner said, even though their partners never like looked after their best interests.
Okay.
Again, you can't say who, because I'm not going to reveal anything at that point in time. I know this stuff because I haven't read the book, but I've read plenty of reviews and checked out synopsises and stuff like that, so I know bits and pieces, but I'm not going to reveal it. I know I can say at the very least that she mentions quite a lot of, I would say personal details, or she mentions a lot of personal details, but even beyond that, she mentions like people's ages and where they reside at this point in time. So she makes it very, very easy for people to find and attack these people if they so wish to do so.
Wow, that's a little too far. And
it's worse with the fact that she doesn't much mention, like, I don't know, her brothers and sisters and adults. She mentions kids by name and by age.
Yeah, that's not cool.
No, and then we'll get into all this stuff.
So just so we're clear, if you want a brand new hardcover copy of this book, it will run you $103.
Well, there's a good reason for that, which I might as well explain now. Essentially, Martha Hart took legal action against this book, and because of the stuff that the book said about her and her relationship with Owen, essentially Owen is one of the only people that comes off this book in the Hart family completely unscathed. But he mentions out the fact that Martha was essentially manipulative and always thought that Diana was a bitch and stuff like that.
Brett has said similar things.
Yeah.
In recent years.
But Martha was the one that actually took legal action against it, and by the time January 2002 came around, essentially the lawsuit had gone through, and she had gotten the book removed from all bookstores by that point in time. So basically, any book that exists of it now is just essentially the books that were released at that point in time that are still in circulation.
So I think I'm gonna buy this. Like, this seems like a very good.
Well, I hope you enjoy a load of spelling and grammatical errors then, because this book is absolutely littered with that stuff.
Ah, shit! I don't want to buy it as much.
It's not written by it's transcribed by Martha Hart because it was written by a ghostwriter.
I see.
So, and the book is utterly terrible in terms of its grammatical content. I think I saw a review. I don't know whether this is completely accurate because I haven't checked, but like I wouldn't not believe this to be true. But apparently, Mick Foley's book "Have a Nice Day" has more punctuation in the first 4 chapters than in the entirety of Diana Hart's book.
Wow.
Uh,
Damn.
and apparently, Stu Hart wrote the foreword of the book, but apparently that's also been called into question.
Damn.
So there was a lot of so other stuff that was mentioned. There was a lot of stuff about how certain members of the Hart family drugged and sexually assaulted other members of the family, or their wives, or their husbands, or anything to that effect.
Jesus.
How one of her brothers' wives faked a miscarriage so she could cover the fact that she got a boob job. How a certain person moved into the Hart family household for a little while and left tons of child pornography around the place. How one of her
Wait, you say a certain person. Is this like if you
I'm saying
said this
certain
person's
I'm
name?
no this isn't relating to just one person. I'm not just when I say a certain person, I'm just referring to my
I know
unwillingness
what
to
you
say
mean.
the
You're
actual person.
saying, but particularly that certain person. If you were to say that certain person's name with the child pornography, would people know?
I have no idea. I do not actually know who that person was.
Okay, okay.
Because the review I read of that one redacted the name out of it because they didn't want to get sued either. Because I'm trying to hide a lot of this stuff. Like it talks about how certain people in the Hart family or who were related to, or in terms of like through marriage or anything like that, were ring rats. How certain people only got married to certain other people because they got pregnant.
This
Uh,
is
talks about
fucking so.
I can at least say about what she says about Brett in terms of the fact that she would call him like a megalomaniac and that he was at fault for the Montreal screw job, and because of his bitterness and attitude towards it, it prevented other people from from the Hart family getting jobs with WWF,
Namely,
namely her, and
namely Davey. Like
well, yeah, it wasn't so much
Davey
Davey at
went
this point.
back, but I think there was always that lingering
Well,
tension.
it wasn't so much Davey at this point in time because obviously she was very much against Davey Boy Smith at this point.
Ah, right, right.
It was more about Harry. Because obviously Harry at this point in time was, I think, a teenager, was clearly going to be moving into the wrestling business, it seemed like. And she even mentions at the back of, I think in the final chapter of the book, how Harry is training to do it, and she believes that he'll be in WWF one day with her as his manager.
Half of that happened, so kudos.
And she was also at that time dating a wrestler as well, who she was also trying to push the idea of him joining WWF as well. But I have no idea. I can't remember who the wrestler was.
Wow, that is
Uh,
something. I learned a lot from you redacting a lot of names, but
yeah.
wow.
She also claims that Bret Hart faked his concussion against Goldberg in order to get the insurance money.
Okay, well, this book was written in '01. In fairness to that, this isn't like an unheard of thing in wrestling. It wasn't like, he hadn't had the stroke yet, right?
No,
So,
that he was only a few months away from having the stroke.
that's,
In 2002, he had a stroke. So,
that is fucking something.
she also suggested that Bret Hart, the only reason he ever won the WWF Championship is because Davey Boy Smith was wrongly fired for steroid use.
That's iffy, but
Well, I think I don't know if there was ever a time that Davey Boy Smith was never on steroids, so I can't really.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, one of the few people that she doesn't take any kind of shots against in this is Vince McMahon. Basically talks about how great of a businessman and visionary Vince McMahon is.
Well,
Says that Vince
she's
McMahon,
clearly. I mean, I don't think it's disparaging to say she was angling for something here.
well, of course she was, but the fact that she went after basically every member of the Hart family to try and do so. She talks about how Vince was kind of a saint and only ever had the best interests of the Hart family at
Well,
heart.
Natty kind of talks about in the DVD release in 2010, the Heart and Soul Heart Family Anthology. she kind of says the Canadian Stampede pay-per-view is one of the last times everybody's together and happy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably fairly accurate.
That's really sad, though.
I mean, I think we mentioned a couple of months back on a former edition of the show that there was at one point a Raw that took place in Calgary, which was attended by about half the Hart family. So I think Diana was there. I think Bruce was there. Obviously, Stu was there as well. And the people that weren't in attendance at that kind of saw that as a betrayal. So they were very much. It was a really, really big war at this point in time between certain members of the clan. And Diana puts herself right in the middle here because she basically leaves nobody outside of Owen like unscathed. Like, she is particularly, obviously I won't reference what she particularly says about it, but she's particularly aggressive towards Davey Boy, obviously, because their relationship was over at this, and Jim the Anvil Neidhart.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I don't want to reference the specific things, but you can read it and figure out the stuff that, if you're that interested, you can figure out some of the stuff that she proclaims that Jim Neidhart did and did not do.
There's a genuine chance that this book may be a very near future purchase of mine.
There's a lot of conflictions about how much of it is accurate, because here's some of the things that she gets wrong in the book. Just a sampling. So she claims that the Hart Foundation's tag team finishing move was called the Avalanche.
Okay.
She says that Owen Hart teamed with Bulldog for 15 years when they barely tagged for 5.
Okay.
Says that the Iron Man match between Bret Hart and Shawn took place at WrestleMania 13, not 12.
Taking the book out of my cart. Oh.
She mentions how Jeff Jarrett was once married to Deborah McMichael, which was never the case.
All right.
How Gorilla Monsoon was a Hungarian wrestler, not American, as he clearly is.
Sure. Yeah. Update. I deleted the book from my shopping cart.
Essentially, Diana Hart, in a load of interviews, talks about how vehemently she is in support of the book and how everything she says is accurate. But then, once all this stuff had been, like, all the lawsuit had happened, by the time 2002 rolls about, she talks about how, she says she, quote unquote, she finally read the book, and it turned out that a lot of the stuff that she had said in the interviews with the ghostwriter had not been noted down or had been taken wildly out of context, and so she disowned the book as well.
Oh, wow. I think that's a lesson to everybody. Write your own book, don't you?
It's a lesson, like, yeah, write your own book and also never reveal any information to Diana Hart. Is basically the lessons to take out of that. Diana Hart is actually still an author at this point in time. She wrote a number of, like, a trilogy of like wrestling themed fiction books.
I can get behind that.
Which are actually, well, I haven't read any of them, but the reviews are a lot more favourable than some of the stuff that she was.
So there's punctuation.
Yeah, she didn't get a ghostwriter to do that one. So,
okay, good.
I think probably the most devastating thing about this entire thing, regardless of anything, is that this book was released a couple of weeks after Helen Hart died.
Oh.
And within this book, she mentioned stuff about Helen which were not flattering to her in the slightest, and yet still proceeded to release the book per schedule rather than delaying it for a period of time for allowing the family to recover from that. I think. I mean, again, I don't know the woman, so I can't really say anything, but this really painted a very terrible picture of her personality and attitude at this point in time in her life.
That's really unfortunate.
We have to get a little bit depressive here. It wouldn't be a 2001
Yeah, it wouldn't be 2001 Wrestling Odyssey.
So that's kind of that. They were the two big news stories, but there are a few other bits and pieces that we can talk about before we move on to our big main event topic. So WWF were entering a stage of not having real financial issues, but money was starting to fall a little bit shorter than it previously was. at the I guess it was be the Q3 financial call that they took. Essentially, they blamed, or Linda McMahon blamed, the loss of earnings as a result of poor creative direction, which is not really something that WWF is known for doing. But
Linda can get away with that shit because she's got nothing to do with it. So she can just be like, yeah, I gotta whip them into shape or whatever, whatever she has to say.
Yeah, so they were coming pretty significantly low, like attendance records, stuff to that effect. So I think they had an average attendance of October of around about was under 7,000 average attendance for shows, which was the lowest since December 1997. So
it's appropriate. It's full circle. The business was hot. It's starting to not be so hot. What can you do?
So essentially, as a result of this, as a result of like the financial contractions, they decided to essentially releases were on the way, and I'm not even talking like talent releases. This was office releases. So they ended up laying off 39 members of their office staff.
Wow.
During this period of time, which is the biggest mass exodus of employees they'd had for a good significant amount of time, maybe even in their history, because this was the time when they were like growing a lot bigger. They'd originally had plans to move out of Titan Towers at some point, but those plans were shelved due to just money not being as readily available as it used to be.
Yeah, I think they're finally getting out of Titan Towers, right?
I believe so, but
they just bought a new building not that long ago.
Well, they finally got around to it then, 19 years later.
I mean, the money came in through one nefarious mean or another.
One of those people released was Stuart Snyder.
Fuck yeah, I love hearing Stuart Snyder gets released.
Yeah, but of course that means that he could. This opened him up for a career in the Cartoon Network. So,
boo, fucking Stuart Snyder is the worst.
So at this point in time, he'd been what's seemingly pretty integral in the transition of WCW to being purchased by WWF, and at this point in time, he'd been company president. But once he was let go, it moved back to being Linda McMahon as the CEO of the company. Terrible. And is essentially de facto president. So
he sucks. So you know what? Yeah. Good that he's out of
there. So we had essentially there was in terms of actual talent stuff, we did have one notable release, which was Eddie Guerrero. Eddie
would
Guerrero
not be gone for long, but
no. Eddie Guerrero was arrested for a DUI on November 9th and released from his WWF contract 2 days later. He'd already been out of the circle for quite a while due to the fact that he'd been suffering from injuries and had a stint in rehab. But and it was also like a tough time for him personally because Vicky and him had separated. She had taken like their kids and moved to Arizona when he was still in Texas.
This is when he goes on and has like another kid, right?
I believe so. I don't know whether that was before or after, if I'm completely honest. But he essentially uses this opportunity to go to he goes on the independent circuit pretty soon afterwards. He does wrestle for promotions like the XWF and the World Wrestling All Stars, like when they do like a few little bits and pieces. Actually, maybe not the XWF, but he definitely wrestled for WWA for a while, and he wrestled for Ring of Honor. Yeah,
we covered one of those matches, I think.
Yeah, so he's wrestled for Ring of Honor for a little while when that was like a real fledgling promotion. And yeah, but then he eventually comes back in April of 2002. He's clean by this point, at least of anything that isn't steroids.
And he stays that way. I mean, again, the workout supplements always have a different connotation to them, and he ends up having the best run of his career.
Yep, he manages to his family come back together. He goes on the run from 2002 to 2005, where he becomes a definitive main eventer. But
It's
sad,
crazy how short of a window that is.
yeah. And how short a window his life ended up being, obviously passing away at the age of 38 in 2005. But
Damn.
there was also tons and tons of injuries at this point in time. I don't want to say tons of injuries, but a lot of long-term serious injuries. So we had Rhino suffered a herniated disc, Canyon torn ACL, Tucker Shinoku had a pretty major shoulder surgery. Mike Awesome also suffered a torn ACL, and X-Puck was suffering with recurring neck problems. And so they were all put on the shelf for long term. Some of them didn't even really. They returned, but they never returned to the main roster. I believe Canyon, Michinoku, and Mike Awesome never wrestled in WWF like TV. I would say TV again. Obviously, Mike Awesome returned to wrestle for ECW One Night Stand.
So Canyon, I didn't know this until really recently, but he had tried out the Mortis gimmick on like SmackDown house shows in like I think '03.
He was trying a lot of like ideas to try and get himself back into prominence. I don't know what it was. Can't remember when the actual time was that he came out as homosexual.
I think it was 2000. It's like 4 or 5. It was
Apparently, a lot of people knew behind the scenes anyway.
yeah. I mean, so the early 2000s was entering that like time where okay, coming out is starting to be accepted. So just like celebrities left and right were like, I'm gay, I'm gay. So it was like very in vogue at the time.
Yeah, but he never realized like got back onto the main programming. So he only ever wrestled really on like Velocity or Heat or shows like that up until the point that he was released. And yeah, that was pretty much like what the situation was in WWF at the time. There was the first reviews of the Scorpion King came out, and they were very, very, very unfavorable.
Yeah.
The first one was from a website called AintItCoolNews.com, who basically said the review they put together was the Scorpion King is pure tripe. Nothing but a sad, cliched, poorly acted, horribly written, and sadly directed piece of garbage. They basically took the script from Conan, dumbed it down, made a few changes, and then gave the characters a lot of lame, I've heard this 100 times before type of lines and ran with it.
And now he's the highest paid actor in Hollywood.
Yeah,
So suck it.
yeah. I wonder what that guy's doing now. But still, having seen the Scorpion King, I can't be completely. I don't think that's completely unfair as some review of the movie.
Okay. Rock's first like 5 or 6 years in Hollywood were absolute garbage.
For the most part, yeah. But he finally hit his stride, and then there was no turning back. We also had we talked about the weak link episode. I kind of wanted to just go back to it a little bit because I did a little bit more of a look into some of the answers that people gave. So Booker T at one time, had to start with Booker T, obviously. He was asked, "What's the French word you chant at the end of a performance when you want to see it again?" Which the answer, of course, would be
Encore.
yeah, and he just said "oui oui." He also said he asked what holiday celebrates the discovery of America.
Let me guess. Did he say Thanksgiving?
Yes, he did. Trish was asked, what name? Say the end of the famous Richard Nixon line. I am not a.
Brooke.
Yeah, and but she
Trish
didn't
would
know what
say
she just
Pizza
passed
Hut.
on it. She just passed on it because she just and said that she didn't know because she's Canadian.
Yeah, that's fair. She's Canadian.
She also said that the capital of Japan was.
I would assume Tokyo, but I don't know.
Well, it is, but you're right with that one. But she said it was Hong Kong.
No. No, that's not even the right country. Oh dear.
And at one point, Stephanie McMahon was asked, like, which restaurant chain had the slogan "You deserve a break today."
And she said,
Kit Kat. You know, the famous restaurant Kit Kat.
you know. So what's the restaurant?
I had no idea because that's
Okay.
American. that's like. But I'm pretty sure that I know that Kit Kat is not a restaurant. So
Kit Kat is not a restaurant, but they did give you a break.
exactly. We talk about the World Wrestling All Stars. They're back in the UK, having a tour like towards the back end of November and early December. So they wrestled just a few, nothing sort of like super major shows. None of it was recorded, but they had Scott Steiner was there at the back end of the tour, so that was the first. That was the one big deal. Jerry Lawler was supposed to be signed to be the commentator for those shows, but obviously he re-signed with WWF, so he sent Brian Christopher in his place.
Wow.
Obviously, actually, Christopher didn't end up doing any commentary. It was in the end, it was Jeremy Borash, and then one of either Conan or Disco Inferno would do it on different nights.
They should have had Stevie Ray do it because suckers got to know.
Well, I'm pretty sure he was right in the in the backstage position. They still the main events for pretty much every show were it was either Jeff Jarrett against Road Dogg or Jeff Jarrett versus Road Dogg versus Scott Steiner for the title. Bret Hart was still commissioner for these entire shows, so he travelled over and was still doing the bits and pieces. On the first big show they did, Jarrett beat Road Dogg, who was described as being completely out of shape and not working properly. And then when Jarrett beat up Road Dogg after the bell, after retaining the title, Bret Hart came out and then put Jarrett in the sharpshooter like he did on the pay-per-view that we watched.
Oh,
so
fantastic.
So they were still heavily pushing the idea that Jeff Jarrett was going to wrestle Bret Hart at some point.
Well, according to Diane, that concussion wasn't even real.
Then we move on to the final big news story, which is what was happening with Joni Laura at this point in time. And I have to say Joni Laura because at this point she was not using the name Chyna, she was using Joni Laura.
Well, I'm guessing she was trying to distance herself from that.
Yeah, probably. So Chyna, I'll call her Chyna for the sake of the wrestling fans listening to it, and it's just easier for me to remember it as well. So she had been spent a lot of time in November promoting her next Playboy, which was released in December. So that'd be the second and final time that she'd be on the cover of Playboy. She appeared on an edition of Fear Factor in November. I think on that episode there was also I saw like little clips of it. I think David Hasselhoff was in that episode as well. That was a big, just like minor celebrity do stuff for charity type show.
Dude, that sucks, dude. She just won the women's title at Mania. That so blows.
She also appeared on like many talk shows, including Howard Stern on the 26th of November, and Stern was his usual himself that you'd expect against Chyna. So basically made assumptions that she had a penis.
Oh, fantastic.
Called her John Laura multiple times during the interview.
He had a penchant for hanging around Nicole Bass. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Mentioned about how because her voice is the way that her voice was, that it's very obvious that she used steroids. But at this point in time, Chyna was still vehemently denying that she ever used steroids.
Training, mental training.
And then she obviously would be talking about the Triple H Stephanie McMahon stuff quite often. I think she was trying to be very, even at this point in time, very diplomatic about the whole thing.
Good.
But she would also mention about the fact that she thought that Triple H was in a bad position now because obviously, if he was to ever break up with Stephanie for whatever reason, that could like permanently damage his career. So Triple H did the smart thing and just married her instead.
I think it's worked out well.
Well, that's kind of it for the news for this point in time. So let's move over to the big main event, the one that we've been waiting basically since WrestleMania for, Survivor Series 2001, where the invasion angle ends once and for all. And with it, really, the end of obviously ECW would come back in its own little guises for it, but this is kind of the end of WCW once and for all.
We've seen recently some trends of like WCW pay-per-view names trademark slipping and Cody snatching them up. Do you think they'd ever be stupid enough to let the WCW trademark go?
No. And either way, like, I don't. I think they probably couldn't just because of its presence on the network and stuff like that. But I just don't feel like it's that super important to keep. It's not like AEW just going to buy it just so they can start calling shows WCW or anything along those lines. It's not like,
But you never know. It could be one of those things where if the trademark, lapses, one day we could have a WCW World Championship Wrestling.
oh yeah, I can imagine that if they were to lose it, someone would buy it pretty quickly.
I
But
mean, it'd be smart to do so.
yeah, but I imagine like they will, even though they've been a bit lapped in terms of like letting certain pay-per-view names go, I don't think that they'd ever lose the actual promotion's name. I don't think they're that bad in that regard. But moving on to Survivor Series 2001, November 18th, 2001, from the Greensboro Coliseum Complex in Greensboro, North Carolina. 10,142 in attendance, 450,000 pay-per-view buys, which was an increase from 2000's 400,000 buys. So it's pretty good going by their standards. Tagline: "Winner takes all," because obviously it was winners takes all, and I kind of feel it has kind of, I don't want to say like an iconic poster, but it's quite well recognized poster of Tori and Leah back to back.
Yeah.
And which I just feel like is just a terrible case of poor planning with the idea that both of them are WWF at this point in time. Like, surely
I think this was a weird case of like, we just kind of want to put the girls on the poster because it would have made sense to just have Alliance on one side, WWF on the other. Even like if it was just Vince and Shane in a face-off, would have made
that's
perfect
kind
sense.
of what they did for Invasion.
But like have them face to face, or even just have they probably didn't know at the time what the teams would be, but if you could have like Austin facing off with Rock, with Vince and Shane in their respective corners, I don't know, you could have gotten around that.
So there was a heat match. It was Just Incredible, Lance Storm, and Raven teaming up to defeat Albert, Sky Too Hotty, and Spike Dudley.
Proper call. Just hearing those names, that is the proper thing to do.
Yeah. So there's a big opening video package which just talks about. Now, this is one of the big issues with the entire Invasion thing, which we talked about. This entire video package is about WWF's history. It doesn't mention anything about WCW or ECW's history.
Because that doesn't matter. We own them now. They can suck our dick.
Yeah, that's pretty much the case, really. Just like, yeah, it's just a lot of people talk about with shots of like Freddie Blassie and Vince McMahon Sr., Killer Kowalski, Gorilla Monsoon, just like shots of like clips, loads of clips from like past WrestleManias and stuff like that have happened. And yeah, and then it's just a load of infighting between the McMahons and all the different teams. It's just a pretty clear signal of this is all about whether WWF survives as opposed to which one of these three is going to survive, or will WCW and ECW survive, or what do they lose if they lose out. We move on to the opening match, which is Christian versus Al Snow for the European Championship. So this, I believe, will probably be the first and maybe even only time we talk about an Al Snow match in 2001.
Unless he does something with Maven on television in the next month.
Potentially. But he'd obviously been spending most of the time of 2001 either injured or, I think, because he wrestles in the Royal Rumble, but I don't think he does anything else major beyond that. And then he goes on to be the trainer for Tough Enough. He gets a lot of good, positive like feedback and reviews from that, and that pretty much earns him this opportunity to fight Christian on this pay-per-view.
Wasn't he the one in the Beyond the Mat documentary that basically said Vince McMahon has lied to me and didn't make any of my dreams come true?
I can't recall it that closely. So,
when I was a kid, and I think this is perfectly accurate because you're a kid and you don't know beyond what you see on TV. It used to bother me that like, why is Al Snow the trainer on Tough Enough and not, Undertaker or like somebody who can actually teach these guys how to win. You ever feel that as a child watching these things, not understanding, you know, that Al Snow is actually one of the best at the craft, and just understanding what you saw on TV?
Well, yeah, because it's just one of those things that there are certain people that know what it takes and are better teachers than they are. I don't say better teachers than they are doers, but they just don't have certain intangible qualities to get them over with the crowd. Like I could probably safely say, maybe I'm completely wrong on this, that Al Snow, as a technical wrestler, is probably better than a lot of top main event guys that have been in the past.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
But he doesn't have the charisma or the presence about him to stand out over those guys.
Correct.
And that's why people like Al Snow could end up being great trainers, or you have
Lance Storm.
or Jason Albert now as
Yeah, what isn't it? Matt Bloom?
Matt Bloom, should I say? Jason Albert, where the fuck did that come from? I just got Albert in my head, and then I just threw Jason in there for some. But
No, that was they used that name
all right,
on when he was doing commentary for NXT.
all right. I knew it didn't come over nowhere, but yeah, Matt Bloom, yeah, as the head trainer as well. I mean, you can say the same thing probably about Billy Gunn when he was training and stuff like that. Like Billy Gunn had a bit more like into the charisma stakes, but he's never really reached the highest levels.
I believe for the AEW side of things now, Glacier.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that one really, because I don't know if I recall him having too many great matches or anything along those lines. But you have
the point is, some people find their niche that way. I just think it's funny looking back on it because I used to just be like, yeah, but like they have The Rock. Why isn't The Rock teaching these guys how to wrestle?
So I'm going to pretty much say from this match, pretty much what I'm going to say about a lot of the matches on this card, that it was pretty pedestrian and nothing really that exciting happened.
Fair.
This was just a bit. It was just a match between two guys who were good in the ring, but didn't do anything super spectacular or had anything that really got the crowd excited. And considering this is the opening match of Survivor Series, this big important pay per view, it really doesn't live up to what it's supposed to do.
Well, imagine if we complained about WWE so much today. Imagine if they just did a pay per view where they going into it, you're just like, guys, we're cleaning house. This is what this pay per view is. We're cleaning house, and that's essentially what they did here. They were starting to just make sense out of their roster.
Yeah, but I kind of get the sense that let's put it this way: if this was a television match as opposed to a pay per view that you'd already bought, and so you're going to watch probably from start to finish anyway, that if this was the first match on the show, you're probably more likely to tune out afterwards.
Fair enough.
Nothing against either one of those two, just that Christian, after feuding with Edge, was pretty much like going. He was European champion, but he wasn't doing anything significant, and Snow had only just come back and wasn't super over at this point in time.
And I think it also speaks to the fact that you have 10 of your best guys locked up in one match.
Yeah.
How much can you really do?
So they had a backstage segment with like the main alliance members, where they're all trying to talk with Austin and try and see whether he's still on their side. There's just a load of infighting within the WCW sides. Then you have Vince and Linda backstage, where they've been interviewed by Michael Cole. Then he just talks about how like he takes calculated risks and how they're still sowing the seeds that there's a mole in the alliance team, and that's going to be their ace in the hole.
And that was Angle, correct?
Yes, that would eventually turn out to be Angle, like burying the lead a little bit there, bro.
Well, listen, if you don't know, you need to go on the network and watch it.
But William Regal then enters and talks about how he's looking forward to taking them out and watching both of them be humiliated, which would obviously come back to bite him in the night after Survivor Series, but we'll come to that in a little while. One of the interesting things, Survivor Series was sponsored by Xbox.
Well, WWF jumped right on Xbox, and their Raw game, if it wasn't already out, it wasn't too far away.
I don't believe it was out at that point in time. I think it was 2002.
But they were one of the first major licenses to sign. I remember vividly the images of The Rock next to Bill Gates, and the graphics of this game, which at the time were utterly mind-blowing and the best you could get on any platform.
So we move on to the next match, which was William Regal versus Tajiri, which was, again, we already talked about that from Rebellion. This was an even worse and even shorter version of that match.
Not much to say here.
Yeah, the only thing that was of note was the story leading into it was that Regal basically assaulted Tori Wilson on SmackDown. Just put her in the Regal stretch, threw her around the ring. It was this again. This is just how people got heat at this point in time, or they got over with the crowd, depending on which woman you were beating up. It's kind of like,
terrible.
Yeah, that was just like the attitude. So I was like, oh yeah, so you're either beating up a woman and you're getting cheered, or you're beating up a woman and you're getting booed. It's just either way.
The important thing is that we're beating up women. Am I right?
Yep, absolutely. And God, that's gonna be like, don't click that. Anybody that's just take
yeah,
that
please.
But you have like it was the most interesting thing about this match is that Regal gets a bloody nose really early on and is just bleeding pretty profusely. I don't know what it was that
He had an
whether it was
issue
a
with
kick,
that.
yeah, whether it was a kick that caught him or anything like that. Yeah, he has bled from the nose quite a lot at this thing.
Yeah, I think he might just maybe it's a deviated septum or something, but he bleeds a lot.
I wouldn't be surprised if Regal had suffered a lot of broken noses in his time, like bare knuckle brawling in Blackpool. Tajiri misses the buzzsaw kick. Regal hits a tiger power bomb to win the match. Regal attacks Tajiri off the bell, and then Tori Wilson comes down to try and save him, and Regal power bombs her again because yay, more domestic violence.
Yeah, what can you say?
Don't do it anymore. Just like
well, thank God they don't.
No. We move on to the first title unification match, which is Edge versus Test. So Edge walks in as WCW United States Champion. Test walks in as Intercontinental Champion. Backstage before the match happens, Test is basically he's going into his big narcissist gimmick of how like super defined he is and all that other stuff. And Stacy Keibler, who I assume by this point in time was dating him, just checks him out and whatever, and just gives him a bit of encouragement before the match happens.
Yeah.
Edge has a promo with Coach where he basically just says the Test gets rejected by every woman on the planet, which is interesting considering the fact that one of the hottest women on the planet just came on to him. So that's like, it's just like, yeah, I don't believe you, Edge. That's but then these two had a match. Again, it's nothing super special. Like, I'd say about 80% of this match is pretty much nothing happening. Like Test had a lot of decent qualities, and Edge obviously became a lot better as time went on. But at this point in time, I just didn't click between these two.
I think Test is one of the most underrated big men, and Edge is on my Mount Rushmore. So,
but this Edge isn't on your Mount Rushmore.
Not this Edge. This Edge, like a year from this and going forward, is on my Mount Rushmore, but not this Edge.
So there are a few like decent moments towards the end. I thought the finishing sequence was pretty good. So Edge like Hurricane Rana's his way out of a powerbomb attempt by Test and then hits the spear on the rebound. Like at one point Test hits his own spear for a near fall, and the crowd got like a nice pop out of that. Edge goes for the Impaler, Test reverses, goes for his full Nelson Slam, but Edge rolls through the full Nelson Slam and pins Test to win. So Edge unifies both belts. They carry on with the Intercontinental Championship, and the United States Championship goes away until 2003.
But this is the last time you would see that United States Championship.
Yeah, until WWE reformatted it into the belt that is still existing to this day. It's like probably one of the longest reigning single belt designs we've ever had.
Probably in our lifetime, yeah. Actually, I'd go so far as to say in our lifetime, it is the longest reigning.
Yeah, it's 2003 till now, and it has basically not changed in terms of its shape or layout since then. So we have a backstage segment where Angle is checking on Stephanie, and Stephanie's freaking out and says that if like Team Alliance loses, then she'll have to be a normal person, and that's like terrifies her. I thought that was great. Stephanie was great in this thing. She, like, I give her a lot of shit from just being like somebody who probably shouldn't have gone the job that she did. Like she has out of in terms of if you're going just based on merit as opposed to the fact that she's related to the person that owns the company. But she was a really, really good heel. And this was
Yeah,
a good segment.
The McMahon family are so good at being the characters they are, and they're never not good at it.
No, they were great at it. They were just overexposed. But then we have the next title unification match, which was the Steel Cage WCW and WWF Tag Team Championship between the Dudleys and the Hardys.
Now, I still think this is great. That might be pure nostalgia, but you tell me what you don't like about this match.
Well, first of all, we'll talk about what was happening backstage, which is Jeff and Lita have started talking, and they're a bit worried about how Matt has been behaving differently the last couple of weeks. Matt says that it's just due to the fact that their jobs are on the line, and so he's concentrating on that. They head off to the match. Lita goes to basically go back into the locker room, and Trish walks out. And so they're kind of sowing the seed to the idea that Trish is seeing Matt on the side, but they don't really go too much further ahead with that.
Isn't she actually seeing Jeff?
Yeah, that's what they end up doing, like in early 2002. But they do still continue to push the idea that Lita and Matt Hardy would split up in like early 2002. That was until they kind of got injured around about in early 2002 when they were supposed to start like separating out a little bit, and they came back to fight Brock Lesnar in 2002 when Brock was really just starting out in the company. His first feud was against Jeff Hardy.
Yeah, and he had to kill both of them to kind of get on with his career.
Yeah. So the first thing I don't like about this match is that it's a tag team steel cage match, and one member of the team has to stand on the apron at the start of the match. Why?
I can understand that.
It's a I know it's the idea like, oh, it's just no disqualification, but like, it's just so. Why does it need to be that way?
Have they done tag cage matches at this point?
I have no idea. This could very realistically be the first tag team cage match they ever did.
Well, no, they did something the year prior with, ironically enough, as you were saying, Edge and Christian and the Hardys, because it's just these three teams over and over. I don't know. There wasn't rules. That might have been an Instagram. I woke up on the weird side of the bed today.
Yeah, it was just like an immediate disconnect for me with that. They have like essentially starts as just any regular Hardy Boys versus Dudley Boys match in terms of like the structure's good, but I've seen it about a million times already throughout 2001, so I don't really need to see it again. But then they start actually fighting off the cage, so there's a good side Russian leg sweep by Matt onto Devon, and then Bubba Ray does a bubble bomb from Jeff from the top rope. Now there's basically no tags being made, and everyone's legal at the same time, but nothing really matters, so that doesn't bother. Now, see, that doesn't bother me. If they just it bothers me the fact they started where tags matter, but now tags don't matter, so that again pisses me off.
Yeah, it's better to just establish that you're going Wild West style on this than to be like, we have rules, we don't have rules.
At one point, Jeff leaps off Bubba into the top of the cage, but Bubba drags him back and puts him on his shoulders so they can hit the Dudleyville device. So essentially their version of the Doomsday device from the Road Warriors.
Yeah, then they did that one for a while.
Devon misses the big headbutt on Jeff, but and then he misses a headbutt from one side because they were basically doing the Hardy Boys thing of one of them was in one corner, one of them was the other corner. Devon misses the headbutt. Bubba then misses the senton. Then Matt does a really good job of just like taking both of them out on his own. So he's basically just doing all the work for a little while while Jeff is recovering. They do the spot where Devon does the diving headbutt to the crotch of Jeff. Stacey then grabs the table on the outside, does a little dance for Nick Patrick to make sure that she can get the key, and so she can open the door and put the tables in the ring. It was actually only one table.
Use the sexuality to your advantage, Dudley Boys.
Yeah. Well, first of all, why did she have to cajole Nick Patrick to do it? Surely Nick Patrick would just do it. because he's Team Alliance.
Well, well, he was trying to be straight. He was trying to be a good referee. Never mind my past. Never mind my NWO history. I just want to be a good referee.
Despite the fact that he turned up in the main event to almost try and screw WWF.
Correct.
Yes. Logic. Let's move back onto the Matt. So Matt, they try and put Jeff through the table with a 3D, but Matt prevents it. Matt manages to climb over the top of the cage, but Jeff is still in the ring. Jeff manages to fight both of them off and goes for a pinfall on one of them, but he gets like a 2 count. At one point, he just fights off Devon, and Devon conveniently ends up laying on the table. Jeff is basically out of the ring. No one can stop him, but he turns around, sees that Devon is on the table. The crowd get excited about the fact that he could dive off and do that. Despite the fact that Matt is screaming at him to come down and finish the match and win the match, Jeff Hardy just goes for broke, dives onto Devon, but Devon has moved off the table and he just crashes and burns straight through it. That was a massive table explosion.
I love this finish.
It's a really good finish. I won't deny that. So Jeff Hardy has wiped himself out, and Matt is desperately trying to climb back into the ring to help Jeff. But by that point in time, Bubba's crawled over, gets the pinfall, and Dudley Boys unify the titles.
Well, now Matt is an idiot. Now, if the match can end by pinfall or submission, you shouldn't have left your brother in the cage.
No, but I guess that was like they're trying to sow the seeds of dissent between the two.
Oh no, they are. I'm just saying.
Oh no, I'm not saying that was like you didn't understand that or anything, because I'm pretty sure
one stupid maneuver begets another is what I'm saying. Is you can say, well, Matt has every right to be mad at Jeff because Jeff is being an idiot, but Matt's being an idiot for climbing out of the cage.
Yeah. So I'd say I don't have the affinity of this match that you clearly have. I don't think that you're wrong to think this match is great, because there are a lot of really good stuff that happened in this match. I just feel like it had a lot of logical inconsistencies, and there were points where it just seemed like there was a long like heat segment on one of the Hardy guys where they were just like the Dudleys just doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff to stretch the match out. So it was a good finish. It was a very good finish to the story, and it sets up for a lot of a match that would lead into Vengeance between the Hardy Boys.
And a lot of things that, again, a lot of what makes this year in retrospect suck is that you're just like, so much of this doesn't matter 6 months from now. Almost none of the year matters by the time we get to WrestleMania next year.
So they advertise a load of upcoming WWF shows, despite the fact that WWF may not exist after this show. So I don't know why they wanted to make it so obvious that clearly WWF is not losing this show.
Well, I think this is where you go do a 5-second logo change, or just have the same logo but put a WCW logo on top of it just in case.
Yeah, maybe. Mick Foley is at New York. He says that he's been forced to stay there by Vince, and says that he hopes the WWF wins. But even if he does, then he's heading to Charlotte for Raw to have a few choice words with Vince. So I might as well talk about that slightly. So after Survivor Series, Foley and Vince McMahon have a segment where they're talking in Vince's private jet, and Foley essentially just quits on the spot. Talks about how terrible a leader and owner Vince McMahon has been, and then he just walks out, and he walks out of the company for about 2 years at that point.
So this dude, like, they hit the hard reset button as soon as the bell rang on the main event of the show. And that to me is something so, it's very ballsy, you know what I mean? Like, we're going to talk about the Raw afterwards soon, but wow, so much of this, again, doesn't matter.
Well, it's a very Vince Russo-esque move. Vince Russo is very famous for his reset episodes of wrestling. Whether it's, I think he did 3 reset episodes when he was at in WCW, including the last pretty famous one where they basically just handed all the titles over and did it all from scratch.
Yeah.
So they just decided to do that for WWF instead. then before the next match backstage, Test attacks Scotty 2 Hotty to take his place in the Immunity Battle Royal. So the gimmick behind this one is that it's a mixture of WWF and WCW and ECW guys, and whoever wins the match cannot be fired for 1 year, no matter which team wins. So it's just a load of nobodies, really, just a load of people that just couldn't get into any real match on this card. And Test, obviously, who's already wrestled. They start off and Stasiak gets eliminated within like a second. He just runs over the top rope, which is basically his gimmick for the entirety of 2001. When the match starts, Taz like walks down to the ring. Like basically the match has already started, and Taz just decides to turn up. So I guess you could kind of just turn up to this match whenever you felt like it, because we also have at one point Hugh Morris and Chavo Guerrero just dive into the ring to start wrestling, but they get taken out pretty quickly after they go in.
Yeah, 2001, baby.
Basically, throughout this entire match, Heyman on commentary is just screaming how upset he is that Taz is in this match.
Good continuity.
We don't have too much else going on. At one point, Heyman says that like in the old NWA, it was illegal to throw someone over the top rope, and when JR just says, "Yeah," and says, what the hell is Taz doing in there? Just like it was a lot of fun. In terms of the battle royal, it's just your typical nothing happening battle royal. Like a few funny spots, a few like interesting eliminations, but really nothing of any note happens in this.
Right.
The final four comes down to Lance Storm, Bradshaw, Billy Gunn, and Test. So 2 Alliance members, 2 WWF members. There was a funny moment where, and I always laugh when Bradshaw does something stupid because it's Bradshaw. So he attempts to do a big boot on Lance Storm and basically loses his balance on the other foot, so he just falls flat on his ass when he does that. So
he's the man. Bradshaw is fantastic.
Test at one point thinks that he's eliminated Billy Gunn, but Billy Gunn is like hanging on in the skin the cat position. And then when Test goes over to the other side, eliminates both Storm and Bradshaw on his own, so he thinks he's won, but Billy Gunn's still there. He manages to take down Test, but as soon as he goes for the famous, he runs against the ropes, and Test just boots him in the face and wins the match. So yeah, just a dull by the numbers battle royal.
And nothing matters here.
No. Then we have like another backstage segment just with Booker T saying that he's not sure about whether he can trust Austin, but Shane reassures him that he can. And then we move on to the Women's Championship match. So the Women's Championship, the first time we've seen this title since Judgment Day, 2001. So all the way back in May is the last time we saw it, and it was vacant at this point in time because of China leaving the company. So it'd be chosen who would be the next one based on a 6-way match. Trish versus Lita versus Jacqueline versus Molly Holly versus Ivory versus, in her WWF debut, Jazz.
Yeah. Jazz is a beacon of hope on a pile of doo-doo at this point.
Well, realistically, the entire WCW side or Alliance side of this was beacons of hope in terms of actual wrestling ability.
Yeah.
Frankly, the only one who was so unbelievably inexperienced and so not ready to be a full-time wrestler was the one who won the match, which I guess is kind of the way it goes. So the crowd doesn't really seem to know who Jazz is when she makes a debut, even though Paul Heyman is like talking her up as a huge deal. But she immediately runs in and slams down Lita. Then there's just a load of just like people just tagging constantly, doing a few little bits and pieces. I think it's quite obvious that like when Trish finally tags into the match, because it's one of those 6-pack challenges where it's only 2 people in the ring and the other 4 are in the corners. When Trish gets a tag in, there's a big crowd pop. The crowd is clearly behind Trish in this match over everyone else. They just do a few bits and pieces where Lita and Jacqueline team up together to do some poetry in motion before Jacqueline takes down Lita because it's every woman for themselves. Then they all do a mixture of their finishers or big moves to each other to make sure that they get taken out of the match, and we're left with Trish and Ivory. Trish connects with Stratisfaction onto Ivory. and wins the first of her 7 reigns as women's champion. Starts right here.
And like she never looked back.
No.
Maybe the best story of the whole night, because you know what, Callum? This matters. Of all the things going forward, this one really matters.
Yeah, this was the start of Trish's ascendancy to being, in many people's eyes, the best women's wrestler in WWE history, or at least like the most important. But it didn't start. Well, let's just say that her reign. This wasn't a great match, as you'd expect. It was very, very short as well, so it didn't get off to the greatest start. And I just have to say, like, as a sign of the times, 2 of Trish's first 3 title defenses were they were against Stacy Keibler in November. One of them was a Gravy Bowl match. The other was a bra and panties match.
Yeah.
Because I think even at this time, even though Trish would end up like really coming into her own and really establishing herself as like, yeah, I'm a really good storytelling wrestler. At this point in time, she was just still a sex symbol.
But now she has the belt, so the belt means more. Even though, yes, using them as sex symbols is a bad thing, the belt means more because it's on Trish.
Well, it had to mean more because it was on nobody beforehand, so it could only really mean more.
Oh yeah, it just died, right? Like the belt.
Yeah, the belt was just basically just non-existent for the entirety of the invasion angle. There's still by the time this match ended, there was still over an hour of the pay-per-view left, and we had one match to go. Vince gives a pep talk to Team WWF before the match takes place. Just talks about how he brings up names like Buddy Rogers, Jerry Graham, Gorilla Monsoon, Andre the Giant, Peter Maivia.
One of the best promos of the year was the Freddie Blassie stand up, get up and fight. You know, that's one of my favorite promos ever, and yeah,
this certainly wasn't one of the best promos of 2001.
No.
It just went on and on and on. Like Vince maybe I get a sense like Vince knew that they were maybe running behind time, and so he just dragged it out for as long as he possibly could, or maybe he just made it deliberately, like so many matches getting over and done with quickly, just so he could do this sort of thing. I bet he felt that this was really important.
Yeah, especially when he gets to say things like Andre, you know, like I think he always enjoyed being able to talk up Andre, because as much as he claims not to like wrestling, he always gets really excited about the stuff he does like.
Yeah, the sports entertainment side of it.
Yeah.
We have the match, obviously the main event, Team WWF versus Team Alliance. So this is the big one, 5-on-5. So it's on the WWF side, it's The Rock as team captain with Chris Jericho, Undertaker, Kane, and The Big Show, versus Team Alliance led by Stone Cold Steve Austin with Kurt Angle, Booker T, RVD, and Shane McMahon. Obviously, as we've spoken about beforehand, there is only 2 WCW or ECW guys in this entire match. Other than that, it's 8 WWF guys.
So again, I want to really focus in on what matters moving forward. There's 2 guys in this match that broke through with this whole movement, and it's the only 2 that have been featured all year. Booker T and Rob Van Dam. You can argue that, yeah, well, DDP was featured, yes, but Booker T wasn't labeled a stalker, and neither was RVD. No, this is like the only shred of alliance that you actually had.
Yeah, pretty much. Basically, it's hard to, we won't be able to discuss like everything that happens in this match, because this match is a good 45-minute plus long. So there is a lot of stuff that happens. There are a few like the story for the first few exchanges is the fact that Shane McMahon is just basically there to break up pinfall attempts. Like, as soon as it looks like a WCW guy's gonna get eliminated, Shane is diving into the ring to take out the WWF guy.
As he should, though. He's the owner of WCW. He's fighting for his brand.
Yeah, and he was just doing it in a very cowardly way, which is the way that he should have done it. Undertaker, as Undertaker does in 2001, basically spends most of the time just beating up people and not selling that much for anybody.
Which is funny because ultimately he attributes the America Badass character to allowing him to sell.
Yeah, I
But I
know
think
it.
it also gave him a road warrior complex.
So the first thing that really happens of note is that, beyond the fact that obviously they started with The Rock and Austin fighting, and they basically did a really abbreviated version of their match at Rebellion for a little while, and they also do that at the end of the match as well. But Big Show tags in, runs through everyone for a couple of minutes, and then he's hit with basically every finishing move under the sun. So he's hit with an angle slam, a scissors kick, a frog splash, and then a Shane McMahon elbow drop, and then gets eliminated.
How do you feel about those kinds of eliminations?
It's pretty bullshit. It's kind of like, well, why was Big Show just in the match anyway?
Well, I think wasn't it supposed to be Vince?
That was
Like
the
it was
original idea.
advertised as Vince,
Yeah, that was the original idea, but then they just switched over to Big Show.
and then whatever, because
Yeah.
they wanted to say Andre.
Shane celebrates the elimination too much, so The Rock gets in and just starts beating him around the ring. Then Kane comes in, chokeslams him. Then he's hit by a tombstone by the Undertaker. Then it's a lion salt by Jericho, and Shane's eliminated.
This is the first time Undertaker did the tombstone in a year and a half, right?
It'd been the first time in a while that he'd done it. I don't know if it'd been exactly a year and a half, but because he did one, he used the tombstone at WrestleMania 17 on Triple H.
Right.
But he was not allowed to use it on Austin because Austin would not allow any pile drivers to be used on him after the. Well, I guess he kind of allowed it for the Undertaker in certain instances in '98, but for the most part, he would not take any pile drivers after the Owen Hart incident.
Which is totally understandable.
Yeah, but Undertaker did rarely use that move at this point. So they did got the heat on Jericho for a while. Eventually, it all breaks down to an all-out brawl where Kane and RVD are the legal men. Kane gets hit with a 5-star frog splash, but completely no-sells it to put RVD in a chokeslam hold, and then RVD does his his flying martial art kick from the top rope, and that pins Kane.
Fair.
Undertaker then basically takes out all 4 Alliance members by himself, just beats the crap out of all of them. Goes for a last ride and hits Angle with it, but is distracted by Booker T with a chair. And then he's hit with a stunner. Austin drags Angle onto Undertaker, and Undertaker gets pinned. So now it's 4-on-2 with only Rock and Jericho on the WWF side. Then we see Rock fighting Booker T for a while, and then Rock manages to whip Booker T into Angle on the apron, and that distracts Booker T, and he gets rolled up and pinned. So pinned with a schoolboy.
Survivor Series. That's the best way I can describe this.
Then they get the heat on Rock for a little bit more. Rock gets the hot tag to Jericho. Jericho and RVD have a little match for a little while, and then Jericho blocks a split leg moonsault attempt, and then he hits RVD with a breakdown, which looked like RVD had never known what that move is or how to ever take it in his life, because that. I mean, I don't think Jericho ever hit that move well, or it definitely didn't look as crisp as a skull crushing finale does, which is the oddest thing to say, that Miz doesn't move better than Jericho does.
That move just fits Miz perfectly.
Yeah, but definitely that looked terrible, but it ended up pinning RVD, so that made it even worse. Then they basically go 2-on-2 for a while. There's another long heat segment on Jericho, an even longer heat segment. This was going on way too long. Rock eventually gets the hot tag, and then he very quickly puts Angle in the sharpshooter, and Angle pretty immediately taps out. So now it's 2-on-1 advantage babyfaces. Austin fights from behind to eliminate Jericho with a really awkward roll up. And then we're down to the final 2, but when Rock looks like he's going to get a good position to take out Austin, Jericho hits him with the breakdown. So Jericho turns heel, almost costs WWF the match because Austin crawls over, but Rock kicks out, and then they have their big back and forth final match between these two.
My favorite part of the match.
What, just these two fighting each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, these two, their chemistry was absolutely electric and never did anything wrong really. At one point, Austin puts Rock in the sharpshooter, and Heyman makes comments about the fact that why isn't Hebner calling for the bell? Because obviously we can never ever forget that Montreal ever existed.
Yeah, well,
Like
did
even when it's WWF against WCW, he still can't resist throwing in the little Bret Hart jab.
how many times did they do that
Too
afterwards?
many. Like,
Yeah, and they're still doing it today. I guarantee you, if they go to Montreal tomorrow, they'll fucking put somebody in a sharpshooter and ring the bell.
so they did. Rock ended up like they did the thing that they typically did of trading each other's finishing moves. Like the Rock stunned Stone Cold Steve Austin, but Nick Patrick came out to pull Earl Hebner out the ring. Then Austin hits the rock bottom, but he only gets a 2 count because for some reason Nick Patrick decided not to fast count it because there's no logic in any of this stuff. Austin then punches Nick Patrick out of the ring, even though he's the Alliance referee that could have helped him win. Rock then blocks the stunner but pushes Austin into Hebner, so Hebner's back down again. And then Austin hits a stunner, but he can't make the pin because the referee's down. Angle comes down, holding the title belt, but instead of attacking Austin, instead of attacking Rock, should I say, he attacks Austin. So Austin's down. Austin gets knocked out, goes for walks into the rock bottom, and Rock wins the match for WWF. So again, very convoluted finish. Stephanie's like screaming and crying backstage with the Alliance because they're just so angry they've lost, and Team WWF is celebrating in their locker room. And then we have the shot of Vince McMahon coming out onto stage, like throwing his jacket on the ground, lifting his arms in the air, and posing for the audience as The Rock just stands there and celebrates with the WCW title, which is now no longer the WCW title, it's just the World Championship.
It's a very iconic Vince shot for a while.
Yeah. I guess I'd pretty much say about Survivor Series 2001 that if there's ever a pay-per-view that's a one-match show, this is it.
Yeah, and I really don't like it because I beat it into the ground, but nothing mattered here, and nothing would matter going forward. We just covered the fact that Kurt Angle helps Austin or helps Rock save the company from Austin. The entire next night is predicated on Austin's back. He's totally babyface. He's gonna beat the crap out of Kurt Angle because he's totally babyface, and it's just so fucking weird.
Yeah, so now we've talked about Survivor Series, we'll just talk a little bit about the Raw after Survivor Series because that sets the groundwork for what would be the next on-running storylines. As you say, it's a complete reset episode. So we talk about Foley quitting the role of WWF commissioner. There would never ever be another WWF commissioner after Foley. So Foley was essentially having legitimate issues with creative behind the scenes and with Vince behind the scenes. So he decided to actually for the time at least, permanently leave the company, and he wouldn't return until the build to the Triple H Kevin Nash Hell in a Cell match at Bad Blood 2003.
More importantly, when Randy kicked him down the stairs, which I think led to the whole Foley versus Randy bit, which was one of Foley's last great matches.
Yeah. There was a lot of talk about, obviously at the start of the show, of Vince winning and celebrating. He obviously there was only a few of the WCW and ECW guys that were still heavily featured on this show, which was RVD because he was the hardcore champion, the Dudley Boys because they were the tag team champions, Christian the European champion, and Test because he won the immunity battle royal. So they have the moment where Vince fires Paul Heyman from commentary and he brings back Jerry the King Lawler.
The greatest part of all of that is Paul Heyman saying, I'm gonna leave, and then he tries to run back at JR, and JR, does the bad punches on him, and he's like, come on, you son of a bitch.
That was a lot of fun, and Jerry's back, and Jerry looks like back to the old self. Like you say, again, just completely resetting. It's like these few months after the invasion never happened. we had Shane come out to talk to Vince. Basically, says that Shane says that Vince was the better man. He essentially turns himself like kind of babyface with this, where he just like he's the bigger man. He accepts that he lost and just walks away and accepts defeat. Whereas
Doesn't Stephanie get dragged away?
well, yeah, Stephanie instead, when she comes out to that, says that it was all Shane's idea. She was manipulated by him. He was the one that told her to slap Linda McMahon. He was the one that told uh, Stephanie to say that she hopes Vince dies, or something along that, but things to that effect. So basically, she was just being like whiny and saying that she hopefully could get by being Dabney's little girl. But Vince instead decides to get her thrown out as well, so she gets taken away by security.
And she's kicking and screaming,
Yeah.
and it's great. And when does she come back?
She comes back in she comes back in late 2001 for a little bit to try and convince Ric Flair to let her work with him. When obviously Ric Flair comes back and takes over part ownership of the company, so she tries to get on his good side if she can't get on Vince's. But then she comes back to be Chris Jericho's manager for a little while.
Right, but does she just come back and it's like,
Yep.
oh, hey, Triple H is my husband, and I'm here again.
Yep.
Fair.
So we have the first of an on-running segment for a good number of years beyond this point of the Vince McMahon Kiss My Ass Club. So
what
we have
an iconic new invention, and I don't even know when it stopped, but I know that he's not showing his bare ass on TV anymore.
So the first inductee into the club was William Regal, who had obviously turned on the WWF to become the Alliance Commissioner. So in order to save his job, Vince told him that he had to kiss his ass. After this long promo segment, Regal finally does it, so he gets the contract back. I think what most people don't remember about that night is that Regal did that, obviously. Obviously, that was the iconic part of it. But then, a few minutes later, Regal then completely squashed and humiliated Taz in a couple of minutes just to show even a guy who just was out there being humiliated and forced to kiss his boss's ass on live TV is still higher on the totem pole than Taz is as a wrestler.
Well, I think height has a factor in that.
Yeah, probably.
My favorite thing about that whole segment is, yes, sunshine. What do you want me to get you some coffee or? No, I want you to kiss my ass. And then he just does it with like the most begrudging peck on his ass cheek, and
yeah, as great as basically William Regal does everything.
Comedy gold.
But then the whole kind of on-running storyline of the show is that it's like you say, again, complete reset. It's turning Vince McMahon heel. It's turning Kurt Angle heel. It's keeping Rock as babyface, turning Jericho heel, and then turning Austin babyface. Austin had been angling to want to turn babyface for quite a while, even though certain people behind the scenes creatively wanted him to stay as a heel and see what they could do to try and better the situation. But Austin's, with the merchandise numbers going down and how the product had turned like negatively, thought that it was pretty obvious that he had to turn babyface again in order to have any hope of salvaging the situation. So they decided to do that by bringing in Ric Flair. So Ric Flair could have sat on his contract for a while with the Time Warner, because that was stretching into 2000, like middle of 2002. But he decides to come back earlier.
Ric Flair doesn't listen to this, and I don't mean this in any offensive way. Ric Flair would have wrestled for a ham and cheese sandwich, and not because he needs the money, but because he loves the spotlight and would do anything to be in that spot. He always tells the story of the day WCCW was bought out by Vince. JR called him and said, "Are you ready to come to work?" And then he didn't call him again for 10 months, clearly letting you know that Flair would have come to work the next day.
So the interesting thing about Ric Flair's contract that he signed, I think it was a 3-year deal, but it was meant to come with very limited matches. He was only meant to wrestle like once or twice a year at most, including a match with Vince at one point. But Ric Flair's first match when he came back was against The Undertaker at WrestleMania 18.
Well,
So
no.
was that always? Oh no, it was he fought
No, he fought
Vince.
Vince first at the Royal Rumble.
So it was the idea that he wouldn't wrestle for a little while, and also he'd get back to quote unquote cosmetic shape, because Ric Flair hadn't been in the greatest of shape. The idea that after WCW ended, he was wrestling mostly in a t-shirt when he did wrestle, like if he ever did wrestle.
Didn't he do the Kiss My Ass match in like a Hawaiian shirt?
Potentially, yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
Vince and Flair have a tremendous match, and then, as I understand it, he didn't want to do it anymore. And then Taker, when he heard, Taker wants to work you, that's when he said, "Okay, I'll do the match with Taker," and then that's it. And he kept saying that's it basically until I think Evolution, and he felt like himself again.
Yeah. So Ric Flair comes back to WWF for the first time since, I guess it would be 1993.
Yep.
He comes out and basically interrupts the awarding ceremony where Vince is going to hand over the WWF Championship to Kurt Angle. Flair says that he's bought out Shane and Stephanie's shares in the company with a consortium backing him, and so that makes him the co-owner of the WWF. And Austin returns, beats up Angle, beats up Vince, and then stares down Ric Flair, takes the title off of Ric Flair's shoulders, puts it on his own, and so Austin's still WWF champion and has returned to being the babyface, beer drinking ass kicker that we all knew and loved.
Great segment.
Yep.
We did not talk about the highlight of the segment, which is you and I are partners, and then Vince tugs at his ear for fucking 3 minutes. What was that?
Yeah, Vince is just the ultimate overseller of everything. I'm surprised. I guess he just decides on the fly what he's gonna do in that moment. Like, I guess he was probably toying between the idea, like, do I pull my ear, like pretending that I have no idea what I heard? Do I like faint in the middle of the ring, something like that? He just probably just threw up a lot of scenarios and just went with the one that felt right in the moment.
It's so good, and yeah, this ended the biggest reset, one night reset, I would argue, in my lifetime of WWF TV.
The only other really notable thing that happens between now and the end of November 2001 is the Undertaker heel turn.
Yep.
So, following on from, I don't know whether it was the immediate SmackDown following this, it probably was, but Vince decided he's going to do another Kiss My Ass Club, and it's going to be with JR instead. Essentially, Vince tried to do, I think, 4 Kiss My Ass Clubs in November alone. Obviously, you had the Regal one to start with, you did the JR one, he tried to do it with Trish, and he tried to do it with Austin. But those two obviously failed.
Well, it was over. It was his ass. It's very, very muscular.
Yeah, it's a good looking ass.
It's a nice looking ass. It can do tricks.
But the JR one did end up succeeding because it was Angle and McMahon that were trying to force him. Undertaker comes out and looks like he's going to help JR, but then turns on JR, beats him up, and just shoves his face right into Vince McMahon's ass because they could never get enough about humiliating JR on TV.
In Oklahoma.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, this is the start. Oh, go ahead.
I think the Undertaker promo was significant to me because he just did the whole, I've seen them all come, I've seen them all go. I watched Bret Hart kiss your ass, I watched Hogan kiss your ass, and then what makes me sick is that I've kissed your ass the most. And now, JR, do you think you're better than me? Punch in the face, shoves his face up Vince's ass. As Vince is wearing his hat, by the way, and doing the little giddy up while JR's face is shoved in his ass. They don't make him like Vince anymore. They really don't.
No, that might be a good thing, really.
Yeah.
But then we have, essentially, that's the first time Undertaker turns heel since his ministry gimmick.
Yep.
So it was short lived, but this is really where we see the best of the badass Undertaker character.
Because he's gonna become a real mean son of a bitch, and
Yeah.
he's gonna show his true self almost.
Yep. So we'll obviously talk a little bit more about what the Here Undertaker was up to when we talk about Vengeance, when he has a match with RVD for the Hardcore Championship. But yeah, this is a pretty long episode, but you have to say that November 2001 is a pretty significant point in WWF's history, because this is the end of the invasion, the end of the storyline that kind of underpinned most of 2001.
Yep.
All over, and now we're completely in a completely new direction with Vince and Ric Flair's the storyline heads of the WWF, and Austin back into babyface. The Rock's, we've got 2 world champions at this point in time. Undertaker turning heel, Vince with his ass out most of the time. So it's crazy times now.
Yeah, unfortunately, we only get 1 month of this to discuss, but this really sets the stage for what I think is one of the better years in terms of the in-ring product in WWE. 2002 is great, and December 01 is going to set up for all that.
Well, in terms of what we have planned for the December edition, our final edition of 2001 Wrestling Odyssey.
I can't believe it's been a year.
I know. So we have Vengeance 2001. That'll be the big, our big show discussion, the final big one. We'll also be talking about all the news and events that take place at the time, including the Triple H return, which obviously haven't seen him around since, I think May was the last time we were speaking about him.
Yeah.
So he comes back, so we'll cover the ins and outs of that and any other big news and stories that we uncover in the research. But yeah, that's all from this edition. I only have a few plugs to throw out now. So if you haven't already subscribed to Smark Out Moment, please do so. It's greatly appreciated. Leave a like on the video. Leave any comments below if you have any questions or comments about the entire thing, how the series has been going so far. Obviously, go back and watch or listen to any previous episodes we have if you want to get all catched up before the final episode comes out sometime next month. We have a very busy December to look forward to, as is always the case on Smark Out Moment with the Snack Talk podcast. We've got our awards coming up in 2019. Yeah, 2019 awards.
Yeah.
Won't do any 2001 awards. So I don't think it's really worthwhile at this point. But
I might ask you randomly, what do you think the match of the year? We might do it quick, but
yeah. But we'll be doing our 2019 awards. A few other bits.
TLC exists.
Yeah, TLC pay-per-view that'll be happening. When we get to the turn of the year stuff, when we do the our future forecasts and stuff like that about who we think the next breakout stars will be. So
we haven't spoken about this, but it's rapidly approaching. I'm guessing we'll do a Wrestle Kingdom review.
Yes, at least me and Rob will. I don't know about Tony, but
Tony probably won't.
Yeah,
but we will do a Wrestle Kingdom review. So 2019 is wrapping up nicely, as was 2001, and there's a lot to look forward to both in the past and the future.
Yeah, so as already spoken about the Patreon, there's also the merchandise shop, so like Redbubble and TeePublic if you want to get some Smark Out Moment merchandise. There's also, if you want to support Fanboys Anonymous, Tony's Geek Culture website, then you can obviously check out their stuff on the merchandise shops and also on Patreon, or just visit the website and read a couple of articles, and that will certainly help Tony out as well, or listen to one of the fan tracks or movie reviews that he's got up on the YouTube channel. You can obviously follow me on Twitter at Wigmeister14. Rob, do you want to throw out some of your plugs?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at DuFelice. Check out WrestleZone.com and check out Fightful.com.
Okay, cool. You can also check out all the articles on SmarkOutMoment.com, all the weekly stuff, all the few little bits and pieces, the extras that I've just thrown out there from time to time. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. So hope you've enjoyed this penultimate edition of 2001 A Wrestling Odyssey, and we'll be back for the final time next month. So thank you very much for listening. This has been another Smark Out Moment, and we are being counted out.